Shuji bore no family name. One solitary word was his whole identity. The only thing he could call his own. Nobody ever used that name. As a kid, they jeered and nailed the label trash to him. As he grew, their taunts morphed. First they branded him weed, then they spat bastard. By the time he reached adulthood, fear trailed his every step. They branded him with titles that reflected his deadly skill: Venomous Snake Spear and Spear Demon. And after countless victories, he carved his way to glory and claimed the grand title, the Spear King. He'd never known comfort. Draped in rags, he clawed through each day on a single potato ration. But he'd shouldered every burden and accepted it all. He'd only ever called the battlefield home. And now he stood staring down a fresh set of enemies. He soaked in their terrified whispers. Some spat, "Monster." Others hissed he wasn't even human but a demon. One voice choked out the question, stammering if he was the rumored Spear King. Their fear braided with pure desperation. They bellowed to one another that their strength in numbers made them unstoppable, and that the moment they killed him, victory would be theirs. A single war cry ripped from them, and they surged forward as one. The instant their blades closed in, Shuji's silhouette evaporated into thin air. A heartbeat later, he erupted above them, rocketing through the sky. He slammed his spear down, impaling his opponent's head in a single brutal strike as the body crumpled. Another enemy spat a curse and screamed for his death, and Shuji's thoughts thundered inside him. He tore through his past, hunting the truth. Was his ability to kill born in his bones, or forged by years of blood? In the end, truth barely mattered. Only what remained would decide their fate. He had felled countless foes with nothing but a single spear, yet he'd always clawed his way back from the brink. The dead's resentment hounded him relentlessly. Behold Shugi. Once they spat on him and branded the boy nothing but trash. At last they fell on the battlefield. Their life snuffed out in the roaring chaos of war. That should have closed his story. Then fate slammed it wide open. Or maybe a cosmic misstep ripped up reality's script and scrambled the order of things. Veered onto a new path, Shuji, whose body ought to have crumbled to dust among the forgotten. Instead, they were ripped from death and reborn into a brand new life. Under a blazing blue sky, Shuji gasped back to life and sank down beneath a tree. He stared at his hands in stunned silence as a wild realization slammed into him. He hadn't been reborn as an infant. He was a teenager. His gaze snapped to a discarded mirror lying on the ground. He stared into his reflection, confirmed every scar and line, and his memory slammed him back to the days he sweated as a humble hand helper. In the distance, battle cries tore through the air, snapping his head toward the chaos. Shuji spun and found the forest bandits locked in a savage fight with the Howling Tiger Escort Bureau, blades flashing and war cries ripping through the trees. The escorts roared vows to guard the goods with their lives as the bandits spat curses and crashed into them with savage, equal ferocity. Shuji hid in the shadows, a dry, ironic thought cutting through his mind. Of all sights after reincarnation, it had to be another battlefield. Suddenly, a voice tore into the silence from right behind him. A bandit locked eyes with him, sneered, and spat. "What's a brat like you doing here?" He scoffed that Shuji could be an escort master. Sure, the kid was nothing but a hand helper. Shuji fixed him with ice-cold eyes, instantly recognizing him as one of those forest bandits who lurk in the trees to spring on and rob travelers, and saw straight through the man's bluster. The bandit's eyes quivered and his body went stone still, fear screaming from every pore. Shuji smirked inwardly. Most of these bandits were amateurs. The bandits roared, "Helper or master, who cares? He's part of the escort bureau." He howled a murderous vow and lashed his spear in a wild arc. Shuji, though, he ghosted past the strike with surgical grace, cool as ice as he catalogued the enemy's painfully predictable patterns. He lunged and snatched the weapon. He snapped his body into motion and hurled the spirit straight ahead. It buried itself in the man's body as the bandit crumpled, disbelief etched on his face. Shuji's voice erupted. His past battlefield glory had been wiped clean the moment he was reborn. His martial arts stayed razor sharp. That alone was enough for him. Yet a darker truth pressed on his mind like a boulder. Shuji's memory flared. They'd all sneered at the martial art he dared to wield. He'd denounced it as demonic and spat at the idea. Now cornered, he had no choice but to cling to it. He left the dying man impaled on the spear and sauntered away with ruthless calm. His thoughts snapped shut as another bandit appeared. He sprang from the shadows, drew his bow, and loosed an arrow. A shaft slammed into Shuji's head, pain exploding behind his eyes. The bandit roared with wicked laughter, gloating that his enemy was finished, and that at last he himself could live. His laughter died on his lips the moment Shuji lunged forward. The enemy stood alive, eyes slicing with lethal menace as Shuji's voice went ice cold. He'd foreseen the ambush, and he ripped into the fool for not confirming the kill. warning that such carelessness is a death sentence on the battlefield. Shuji drove the spear clean through him with a savage thrust, snuffing out his life in an instant. He heaved his weapon aloft. Shuji shouldered 2 dead men skewered on his spear and grinned. The weight finally felt right. He stared at the Howling Tiger Escort Bureau, battling the bandits with desperate fury. Nostalgia hit him like a blast as his old days flared alive, filling him with warm, aching joy. He strode into the battlefield, every step measured and unshakable. Corpses swung like ragdolls from his weapon, freezing bandits and escorts in stunned silence as whispers rippled through them. Some dared to ask what kind of man he was, others swore he couldn't be human, and their fear exploded when their leader stepped into view. The bandit leader bellowed into the trees, declaring himself the head of the forest bandits. Shuji's grin crackled with anticipation, hungry to test his strength, while the leader's smile twisted cold, and he vowed to wipe that grin off Shuji's face. Before flinging a colossal axe straight at him, Shuji sidestepped the attack like it meant nothing, his casual motion sneering at the wasted effort. Seething, the bandit leader roared again, spitting "rat" at him for dodging. Then his bravado splintered. Shuji catapulted the lifeless body straight at him. Shuji's voice stayed ice-cold as he pointed out the man's raw strength was jaw-dropping, and that was all he had. Shuji unleashed one decisive swing, his spear a lightning blade that split the man cleanly in 2, and his voice rang out sharp and clear. He snarled and shouted, "This is what a true attack looks like!" Horror ripped through the onlookers. Some cried he'd felled their leader with a single strike. Others murmured he was a monster, and panic leapt from person to person like sparks in dry grass. Shuji scowled at his weapon, snapping that it still felt too light. He set his jaw and moved to fix it. He skewered the leader's cleaved body onto the spear with the others, eyes gleaming as he crowed that the weight was finally balanced. Panic ripped through the surviving bandits. Their ranks shattered, and they bolted in every direction, screaming, "Retreat!" and howling that the man before them was not human. Shuji scrutinized the corpses he carried. Then a ghost of a smile tugged at his lips as understanding clicked into place. A whisper in his mind hissed that when blood and demons collided on the battlefield, they forged what men feared most, the tricolored Dango mountain bandits, and time itself snapped back 10 years. On that very mountain the spear demon returned, and Shuji's grin snapped back as he admitted to himself how good it felt. One of the escort guards bellowed, ordering his men not to let a single bandit escape, as the battle raged behind them. Steel clashed and screams shredded the air. The guards thundered the wind was at their backs and swore they wouldn't allow a single bandit to live amid the chaos. Shuji froze, razor eyes carving through the chaos. Then a flicker at his side snagged his gaze and rooted him in place. A thunderous shout ripped across the battlefield, dripping with arrogance and crackling with fury. The bandit roared at the bounty hunters, demanding to know who they thought they were to kill his men, and threw down a gauntlet, daring them to meet him head-on if they had the nerve. Shuji locked his gaze on the man, and whispers from lingering spirits curled into his ear, revealing the fierce fighter was Ego, their former leader. The spirits begged Shuji to bring him to their side too, insisting their boss was strong, and Shuji narrowed his eyes, acknowledging what he'd heard. This man was truly cut above the common rabble. Pummeled by the spirits' relentless demands, Shuji caved and swore he'd make their wish come true. A glacial grin split his face as he snarled that Ego too would be devoured whole. Igo ripped into the escorts with a berserk onslaught, cackling as he swung his weapon and screamed for them to die. Then, in an instant, a voice ripped his name from the air. He froze, spun back, baffled and burning with fury as he snapped, "Who dares call me like that?" In that split second, Shuji unleashed a savage strike. Igo barely parried the strike, the blow's force flinging him to the ground. His eyes shot wide. He spat a ragged cough of fury and demanded, "Who is Shuji?" Shuji didn't answer. He fixed them with a silent stare, his face a stone-cold mask that gave nothing away. Ego flinched at Shuji's demeanor, muttering in disbelief as the sight sank in. Horror hit when he realized Shuji was dangling a man from his spear. The fallen bandit's spirits howled again, demanding why he alone had been left alive and beckoning him to come over. And when their ghostly chorus kept chanting his name, Ego crumbled in terror. Tears carved rivulets down his face as he howled, "Shuji's a demon!" and begged for help. The spirits leaned close and whispered again, their voices slicing the silence. They screamed for him to join them before Ego could wrench himself free from his fate. Shuji launched in a single blur, his blade flashing as he cleaved the head clean from the shoulders, and the lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Shuji loomed over him, gaze ice-cold, as he replayed the technique he'd just unleashed, dissecting every motion in his mind. He remembered that speaking a name 3 times would hurl a soul into the underworld, each call yanking the target closer until the final utterance shoved them into the afterlife. He forced himself to admit it. He hadn't used this technique in ages. Memories stormed through him. Deep into the night, beneath jagged mountain peaks, Shuji stood as a young soldier. They clawed up the steep cliff, every inch a brutal battle. Exhaustion gnawed at him, breath torn and ragged as he cursed his luck and howled that, as a rookie, he'd been forced into every brutal scouting mission. He hauled himself up onto the ledge, collapsed, panting as he spat bitter curses at the military that had promised he'd never starve. Yet the cruel reality was no different from his days as a slave. Then, a sinister shadow slithered up behind him, its menacing aura crushing down onto his back. Shuji's eyes snapped wide with alarm, instincts screaming and thoughts racing as he scrambled to figure out what it could be. Tiger? Ghost? Whatever it was, it radiated pure, bone-deep menace. A single brutal truth hammered into him. Never look back. He clenched his teeth. He wrenched his head back, forcing himself not to turn, repeating like a broken mantra that one glance would mean death. He'd sworn he wouldn't die in a place like this for nothing. But then, a shadowed figure's voice cut from behind him. Shuji snapped rigid, sweat pouring down his body as he clung to every syllable. The voice sneered that his desperate fight to survive was pointless, his life no more than a bug's, and dared him to gamble, whispering that one bold bet could be his only shot at ripping apart that miserable fate. Shuji's resolve cracked. He spun to face the voice and spat. "Why should I believe you?" An old man loomed before him, erupting into a deep, booming laugh at Shuji's defiance before snapping. "What's your name?" Shuji froze. Then after a heartbeat he answered, "Shuji." The old man lunged forward, eyes blazing, and barked, "What did I just say?" Shuji bellowed his name over and over. "My name is Shuji!" The old man leaned in, demanding the answer one more time. Shuji swallowed hard and stammered, his voice trembling as he began to reply. He didn't finish his sentence. The old man lunged forward with blinding speed. He exploded forward, closed the distance in a heartbeat, and clamped a hand around Shuji's throat. Shuji slammed into the dirt, blood spilling from his mouth as a ragged groan tore out of him, and his mind reeled at the man's impossible speed. He hadn't even seen the movement, while the old man's cold, commanding voice told him that to kill someone he had to say their name 3 times. Whatever they said, this method would let him slaughter anyone, and a bolt of understanding ripped through Shuji. This man who'd granted him demonic power was his master. Dread slammed into him as he recognized the man. Kokufu, the blood demon, the living embodiment of evil in the martial world. The memory dissolved, and Shuji snapped back to the present, his spear a whirling blade that cut down bandits without pause. Amid the carnage, his eyes snagged on something that shouldn't have been there. Clarity ripped through him. His thoughts snapped into the sharpest focus he'd ever known. He realized the demonic power Kokofu had given him was incomplete, half-formed and ravenous. A seed of demonic energy had burrowed deep into his dantian. A poison brewed to rot his bones and cloud his mind instead left him sharper than ever. He surged his aura through every fiber of his body. Then, he froze as the buried truth of his past life slammed into him. After he joined the army, that memory was swallowed whole, buried under endless drills and orders. As a kid, he mastered the Miao tribe's breathing technique, and that steady pulse now anchors his consciousness, keeping his mind razor-sharp even as demonic power rages inside. He branded it a strange coincidence as his master's words reverberated through his mind. Until he seized total control of the demonic power, his sanity would be ripped to shreds. A faint smirk crept across Shuji's face as he pictured Kokufu's expression the moment this secret came to light. Then a voice thundered from behind. Shuji spun on his heel and locked eyes with the escort. The Howling Tiger Escort Bureau agents pressed around him, voices raw with gratitude as they poured out sincere thanks for pulling them out of that deadly situation. A young woman planted herself in front of the group. She stared at Shuji, wary and awestruck, mind racing. She knew it. Even standing still, he radiated a crushing pressure, had carved through the bandits with terrifying ease, and she vowed she wouldn't let him slip away as he snapped, "What do you want?" She admitted she couldn't fathom why a man of his caliber was reduced to a mere convoy hand in their bureau, then begged him to keep lending them his strength. Shuji snapped no without a second thought. His blunt refusal sent the girl reeling, stammering as she lunged to stop him. He spun on his heel and said, "If you have nothing else, I'm leaving." Something snapped inside her. She couldn't just let him walk away. If he refused to join them, she'd drag him in herself. She whipped something from her pocket and held it out. She slapped a golden token into view and declared the Tiger Pit sect's seal was stamped on it. From MANHUA sprang a prestigious sect that ruled its enforcement bureau. Clutching that token, he'd be swept inside and hailed as an honored guest. She fell to her knees, shoved it into his hands, and begged him to accept it as a sign of her sincerity. Shuji stared down at the token. Etched on it were the words, Tiger Pit Sect First Class Escort, Shuaika. He froze as a memory slammed back into him. He remembered the Tiger Pit sect's ironclad reputation for honest, upright conduct, yet he knew that within a few years the sect would vanish without a trace, a tragic fate waiting to claim them. He reached out and took the token. Shueika beamed, thanked him, and promised they'd head back to their transport duties now, but once they'd wrapped up, they'd return to greet him again. She and her group dropped into a sharp, respectful bow, then swept out of the room. Shuji flashed a grin, tossed a leg over one of their horses, and declared he was borrowing it. Panic flooded Shueika as she barreled forward, yelling at him not to use that animal. Its temper was too wild, and they'd kept it only for hauling cargo. Shuji vaulted into the saddle like he'd owned it forever. The horse obeyed him utterly. An escort gaped and whispered that the beast had suddenly gone tame, and then, shocking everyone, the horse relieved itself mid-stride as if bowing to Shuji's command, sending Shueika and the escorts into stunned gasps. Shueika blew out a breath, muttering that for someone his age to ride like a demon and pull off everything else so flawlessly he was a monster, and an escort guard chuckled, teasing that it must be love at first sight. Shuji was strong, handsome, and exactly her type. Her eyes snapped razor-sharp. She drew her sword and leveled it at the man, accusing him of insulting their benefactor and hissing, "Do you have a death wish?" The guard went pale and stammered frantic apologies, babbling that he was only joking. At last, she slid the blade into its scabbard. Her face snapped cold as steel. She leaned in, voice low, and told her men exactly what she'd seen. She'd watched his spear technique with her own eyes. An escort ventured he might be the son of that renowned spear-wielding noble house. Shueika shook her head. She snapped that this wasn't martial arts at all. It was cold, drilled military spear technique. Mastery and insight poured from him like a veteran in a child's body. Another guard gasped, demanding to know if she truly meant what he suspected. Shueika nodded sharply. Her mind snapped to the truth. Shuji had to be the son of a powerful military family. Fresh from his training and out on a warrior's journey, he moved with fierce purpose. She watched him closely, saw his iron honor and the way he'd risked his life to save them, and knew that once he learned their sect was in crisis, he'd charge to their aid. A silent, desperate plea burned in Shueika, as she begged Shuji to rescue the Tiger Pit sect from the Black Tao sect's iron grip. Meanwhile, Shuji snarled at the horse, eyes blazing, warning that if it dared to relieve itself again, he'd cut it so badly it would never be able to do it again. His thoughts slammed back to the Tiger Pit sect. He muttered under his breath, gauging how it was holding up now, and then one man's face exploded into his mind. Aiku. The name slammed into him as he clenched his jaw and wondered how that man was holding up now. Shuji's memory of the first time he met Koiko crashed over him. The man who, after Shuji joined the army in his past life, became his first true bond. The comrade and sworn brother who alone shared his fate. Fresh-faced and green, Shuji was just a recruit. One day he reached for a bite and a senior soldier kicked him aside, roaring that he dared to eat without offering tribute. The man barked that new recruits had to hand over their meals to the seniors, refuse, and they'd end up getting beaten. Confusion slammed into Shuji and he snapped, "I've never heard of a rule like that." Just as the bully lunged to press his advantage, a sharp voice sliced through the air. Koiko sneered at the absurd hierarchy and barked that Shuji, being the freshest recruit, was technically the next newest. So if the rule meant anything, Shuji's rations should be seized too. He sneered, "You gonna take mine too?" The man snapped with rage, hurled himself forward, shouting he'd smash his face. But before his fist could land, a potato slammed him squarely in the head. Koiko had hurled it with pinpoint precision. Pain ripped through him as he reeled, and the other man sneered, daring him to gulp it down and stuff his belly if he still had any teeth. Then, without a second thought, he barreled forward, pummeling him until his face was a swollen, bruised mess, and with every strike he spat, "You still got the nerve to come back for more?" He cackled, ready to knock every last tooth from his mouth with glee, and the bully could only groan, utterly defeated. Shuji froze, shock rooting him to the spot. They'd told him not to interfere, but Aiku snorted, shoved their concern aside, and declared survival demanded raw strength. "You eat without surrender." He hurled another potato straight to him, and just like that they met for the first time. From that moment, Shuji didn't see him as just a fellow soldier anymore. He was a comrade, a blood-sworn sibling, shackled to fate itself. Aiku stepped forward, declared Koiko, and tossed the question to Shuji. After a heartbeat of hesitation, Shuji finally spoke his name. Time raced forward. One day, as they fought tooth and nail to survive on the battlefield, calamity tore into them. Kokufu, a demonic horror, burst onto the cliff and clamped its hand around Shuji's throat at the edge. Aiku screamed, frantic, threatening to fire a flare if Kokufu didn't let him go. Choking, Shuji begged him to run. Kofu's grin froze like ice as he sneered at them both, taunting them without mercy. He loosed his grip. Shuji plummeted down the cliffside. Aiku howled his own name in gut-wrenching anguish, but by sheer luck, Shuji dug his fingers into the lower ledge, hanging by a thread as he bellowed up. "Don't waste the flare. Get out now. Escape before it's too late." Kofu wasn't finished. Cool as ice, he declared he had no intention of killing Shuji. Not yet. Instead, he dropped a proposal. If they handed him the herb that could seal his bleeding insides, he'd unleash the strength they'd need to survive. They locked eyes in a suffocating silence, and Shuji's inner voice finally surrendered. There was no choice but to accept. The instant they gave their assent, Khufu's satisfied smile curled on his lips. "You at least have determination in your eyes," he said. And later he opened his secret art. Unrestrained demons. Human souls devoured by tigers and twisted into demonic servitude, who offer others as sacrifices to boost their master's spiritual rank. His demonic art fed on the dead's grudges, devouring their resentments to blast a practitioner's rank upward. Called the art of the unrestrained demon, it split into 3 brutal phases: compression, tempering, transcendence, each forged of 10 escalating levels. At the first stage, under brutal compression, demonic energy gushed out like scalding steam. In the second, tempering twisted the practitioner's blood into deadly venom. Any spill erupted in a spray of crimson mist. Beyond that waited the final transcendence stage, and Kofu himself had plunged 4 levels into it. He spat that good, evil, even demonic meant nothing to him now, and he ordered them to carve his teachings into their hearts to survive. They're hurled onto battlefields, forced to carve a path of endless slaughter, devouring grudges to seize their destiny. They readied themselves as Kofu barked their next mission. Their mission: retrieve 100-year snow ginseng. Shuji leapt at it without a second thought, but Aiku protested, insisting the herb lay far beyond their reach. He asked instead for Khufu, kick things off by cracking open their Renindu meridians with the simple herbs they already had, building the rock-solid foundation they'd need to hunt down far stronger ingredients. Kofu hesitated, turned it over in his mind, then yielded. He accepted his reasoning. Aiko shoved Shuji into the spotlight and demanded he open his meridians first. Shuji fought back, but the man bore down on him. He snarled, "Going second is always harder." They sparred for a heartbeat, but in the end, their agreement snapped into place, sealing the pact. He punctuated his words with a sharp fist bump and snapped, "Got it!" Fate was cruel. Sometime later, Shuji staggered through the rain, arrows studding his body and dragging a crimson trail as he gasped for air, clutching the herbs he'd fought to gather. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to believe everything would be fine now that his brother and master would be saved. Then he tore back to the hideout. A thunderclap ripped the sky, casting their master Kofu in a brutal, shocking light. He sat, headless and eerily calm in full lotus, his severed head lying before his body while someone stood behind him. Drenched in blood, he gripped a sword. Aiko's lips twitched into the tiniest, almost hidden smile. Shuji flung the hymnals to the floor, horror ripping through him, and they barreled forward and scooped him into their arms as he crumpled. Quaking, Aiko demanded to know what had happened, his voice a thin, fragile whisper. They snarled that Khufu had never intended for them to live. He'd leapt into action first, desperate to stop them from dying. Terror ripped through Shuji as he realized his meridians were shattered, and every drop of his demonic energy had been siphoned away. Tears carved tracks down his cheeks as Aiku battled to soothe him. He scoffed, shrugging off the killing of a half-dead old man as nothing. Summoning the last of his strength, he ripped the final lie away and revealed his true identity. He stood alone, the last survivor of the Tiger Pit sect, its banners torn and its halls razed. Shuji once confessed he'd served a short, gritty stint in the Tiger Enforcement Bureau and swore the sect's leaders were decent people. Every time he spoke about his parents with tender pride, a bond ignited. He soon claimed him as family. His voice cracked as a smile broke across his face. "I'm so glad I met you. If you ever get the chance, please, avenge me." The words tore out, and the memories splintered into 1,000 jagged shards, were ripped back into the present. Shuji planted himself in the bustling din, a white-hot voice inside him screaming with resolve as he vowed, in this life. He vowed no grudge would ever rise. He'd stop the Hu clan's destruction. He'd already pulled the Tiger Enforcement Bureau and its finances back from the brink. But that wasn't enough. So he pushed harder and rode into Anhui. He vaulted off his saddle and planted himself before the small manor, and surged forward to slip past her. He ventured the question, politeness lacing every word. Rage boiled in the man's veins. He lashed out and struck him for daring to speak so casually. Shuji surged forward and toppled him in an instant, pummeled him, relentless, until the man, he crumpled to his knees, eyes swollen and blackened, roaring for answers. Shuji locked onto the shadowed manor and shot. "Is that the Tiger Pit sect?" The man met his gaze and confirmed, "It is." Shuji slammed forward, pushing even further. He snapped, "Is the sect leader Ko-Genin and his wife Shajian?" The man reaffirmed it. Shuji finally asked, "Is our son Koiko?" And the man's flat denial slammed into him, leaving him stunned. Shuji yanked his collar as disbelief slammed into him. A roar tore from him as he demanded clarity. He stammered, eyes wild, insisting Shuji must have misheard Ko-Genin. His wife had no son at all. They had only one child. Shuji, the daughter, staggered back as disbelief slammed into her like a punch. His head snapped as truth slammed into him. The name he'd always believed belonged to his sworn brother from a past life actually belonged to a young woman. Koiko was a woman. Shuji's brain slammed to a halt. The idea ricocheted in his skull, taunting him. Aiku was a woman? It sounded impossible. But the truth glinted before him like a blade. He clawed at his hair, frustration coiling as he weighed his options. If he brandished the gold token, he could stride openly into the Tiger Pit sect and see the truth with his own eyes. But that would smash his future plans. He had to find another way. The entrance door burst open and a booming voice bellowed, calling out to him. A man charged at him, bellowing that Shuji had vanished, and then strolled back like nothing happened, calling him an unreliable brat who'd been ordered to clean up the horse manure but ran off. The man snatched Shuji by the collar, eyes blazing, demanded to know where the others were, then dragged him inside. Shuji lingered in the shadows, eyes sharp, as the man pegged him for a homeless boy under his care. That blunder handed Shuji the advantage. Inside the stable he strode forward, chest puffed, and declared with fierce pride, "I'm Wu Tuyen, the man who runs the Tiger Pit sect's stables," then snapped out one sharp, simple command. Shuji was stuck handling nothing but manure and feed under his watch. Wu Tuyen snapped that it was better than living homeless, and insisted he'd explained it all 2 days earlier. Shuji scoffed, shrugged, and snapped that he didn't know. Wu Tuyen snapped, glaring at Shuji like he was an idiot, forgetful and brazen enough to talk back. Then spat that the boy ate leftovers, slept in the stables, wasn't wanted by the sect, and was only kept out of the leader's pity, so he had no right to run off just because the work was hard. Told to actually do his job properly, Shuji couldn't be bothered. He snapped his gaze away the instant his eyes slid elsewhere. One horse suddenly panicked, reared up, and lashed out with a savage kick that slammed straight into Wu Tuyan. It hurled him into the dirt, slamming him down as he clutched his knee, pain exploding across his face. Shuji's brow knotted in confusion as he strained to figure out why the horse had suddenly bolted into a frenzy. A mocking laugh ricocheted through the stable as the nearby young master crowed that the horse was a top-grade beast. He crowed it had cost him enough to buy a mansion, and even then it fought like a wild beast to tame. The servant at his side grimly revealed a stable boy had been injured. The young master sneered, brushed the whole thing aside like dirt, and spat that the stable boys were no better than dogs. Just tossed them a scrap of feed on their way out. The other stable hands surged to Wu Tuyen's side, spitting that the visitor was the lecherous Jiao brat from the Jiao clan manor. Wu Tuyen groaned in agony, clutching his leg, while Shuji stood at the back with arms crossed, watching every twitch with cold, careful eyes. Aiku's warning from his past life thundered in his skull. The man before him, Jiao Taihan, had masterminded the Tiger Pit sect's ruin. The air reeked of horse dung. But what rattled Shuji most was the looming presence of the Jiao clan. Jiao Taihan's lips curled into a sly grin, as he scoffed that merely being spotted by the stable hands would stain his fine clothes. A stern voice snapped, cutting them off. Ko-Genin, the sect leader, barreled in, insisting he'd raced over the moment word of a guest reached him. The instant he spotted Jiao Taihan, his face went cold, and he demanded to know the reason for his visit. At once, Jiao Taihan and his lackey snapped into deference, bowing low with oily smiles as Jiao Taihan called Ko-Genin father-in-law, and insisted he'd come only to see his future bride. A dark smile split his face as he coldly snapped that he meant Aiko. Rage carved Oganon's face as he snapped that he'd never approved such a marriage. Jiao Taihan grudgingly admitted it might hold for now, but vowed the moment Aiku hit 16 he'd stage the wedding. He crowed that the whole region was buzzing and children were already singing songs about it. Ko-Genin thundered that he'd been spreading rumors to destroy his daughter's future. Jiao Taihan choked out a nervous laugh, waved it off as a joke, and insisted his clan was far inferior to the Ko clan. They'd never go to such lengths. Rage ignited in Ko-Genin, his eyes snapping wide as he coiled to strike the insolent brat. But before the confrontation could erupt, a calm voice sliced through the silence. A girl glided forward, every step dripping with grace. Both Jiao Taihan and his lackey went rigid, jaws dropping as her beauty struck them dumb. It was Koiko herself. her tone steady as steel as she pronounced there would be no engagement between their families, and ordered Zhao Taihan to stop fixating on her and find another woman. Zhao Taihan's voice cracked as he choked out a desperate warning. Rumors were poison, ready to tear her life apart. Aiku leveled an ice-cold stare and snarled that any more talk was pointless. She vowed she'd never marry him or anyone from Zhao Clan Manor. She tore her gaze away, spun on her heel, and marched off with her father. Zhao Taihan watched them leave, bitterness coiling in his gut, and sneered that she was arrogant, even though she was a woman teetering on bankruptcy. When his lackey asked what to do, Zhao waved him off. They'd only stopped by on the way to the brothel anyway. Still, he muttered, voice cracking with disbelief. The rumors hadn't lied, and his servant, breathless, confirmed she was even more beautiful than they'd claimed. Zhao Taihan's face twisted into a sinister grin as he confessed his obsession. Heppel had called her a woman whose beauty could topple nations, and he swallowed that truth, murmuring, "A woman with such beauty. She'd be swallowed by tragedy the instant she had neither power nor wealth. She was far too beautiful for the Tiger Pit sect. She should be cursing the misfortune of being born there, but it was too late." That wicked man had already fixed his gaze on her, and his lackey could only sigh that she was a poor girl. Zhao Taihan burst into a wicked laugh, urged his horse forward, and bellowed they were riding straight to the brothel. He vaulted onto his horse. He scowled as the beast planted its feet and refused to budge. His lackey stepped forward and asked what was wrong. They stared, thinking the horse might be sick. Then white foam bubbled at its lips. It crumpled, flinging Zhao Taihan through the air and slamming him hard onto the ground some distance away. Shuji froze, swallowed by shadow. He clenched the animal's liver in his palm. Cold satisfaction curled in his chest as he replayed the fox claw technique, the vixen's art. Perfect. He'd slipped the liver out cleanly, left no mark, and no one would ever know why the horse died. He pinned it all on that man. Every twist and tragedy traced back to Zhao Taihan. He'd been the one pulling all the strings. Shuji's memory flared with Aiku's explanation. The Tiger Pit sect was ripped apart and toppled by a ruthless power struggle with Zhao Clan Manor. Truth hit him like lightning. Zhao Taihan had been pulling the strings the whole time. Aiku must have known. Convinced her beauty was a curse, she set her own face ablaze. Shuji wrapped his hand around the liver and crushed it. In that instant, the reason she'd done it slammed into him. Doubt crumbled. He charged forward to avenge his sworn brother. He vaulted the wall and stuck the landing with surgical precision. From this heartbeat onward, he sprang into action. Deep within Anhui Province's Naimatsu Prefecture, Shuji strode down the dimly lit street. At last, he reached a dusty farm tools shop. He skidded to a stop at the entrance and he exhaled a hushed confession. It had been ages since he'd last set foot here. He burst through the doorway and charged inside. Missing his right arm and right leg, he slumped on the floor, drinking hard, shot Shuji a suspicious glare and demanded who he was. Shuji gave a simple name, but the man sneered that he knew no one by it, declared himself retired, and told Shuji to get out of there. Shuji brushed him off, flopped onto a wooden block, and asked the old man to make him a hammer. The old man scoffed. They doubted his seriousness, but Shuji snapped precise instructions. It must be 17 sun long, barely 4 sun across and weighing under 10 jin, its head a perfect sphere. His blood ran cold, shock glued him to the spot, then his face snapped into razor-sharp seriousness. He scoffed that the hammer couldn't even sink a nail. Shuji met his gaze, voice like iron. "I'm not using it to drive nails." The old man leaned in, his voice cutting through the room. "Anything else?" Shuji slammed down an order for 2 massive blades, each 18.5 sun long, wrapped in crocodile leather, and demanded they be forged as true heavy weapons. When asked whether he wanted a sword, axe, or spear, Shuji snapped, "Spear!" The old man snatched up a stick and lashed it at the wall. He brandished the blade and declared it his best weapon, warning that sharpening its edge would steal a whole day. Shuji seized the offer and demanded small razor-sharp blades. The old man rammed his stick into the wooden block Shuji sat on. Hidden compartments sprang open, spitting iron thorn spikes. Shuji scanned them with a satisfied grin and snapped, "I'll take every last one." When they asked where to deliver them, Shuji shot back, "I'll come pick them up myself." The old man rasped that such an order would exact a brutal price. Shuji barked, "Name your price." The old man went quiet for a heartbeat. Then his voice sliced through the hush. He choked out that his daughter had died 3 days earlier. He leaned in, slow and predatory, closing the distance with unsettling intent. He clutched Shuji's shoulder, voice cracking as he begged if there was any way to bring her back. Shuji didn't flinch, didn't respond. He just stared back, silence sharp as a blade. The old man finally stepped back with a long sigh, confessing Shuji reeked of blood so fiercely he'd taken him for a ghost. Now that he saw he was flesh, only one question burned on his lips. Rage burned in him as he vowed to kill the men who murdered his daughter. Shuji snapped to his feet and demanded who they were, and the old man spat. "The Black Dao sect!" Shuji gave a single blunt nod. He spun to leave, and the old man howled after him. "4 of them, all from the Black Dao sect." In that instant, a murderous aura ripped off Shuji's body as he shot back, his voice an icy blade. He didn't even need to hear their names. He would kill every last one. At the shop's threshold, Shuji hesitated, then fired off one last request. He demanded to know if the old blacksmith also stocked work clothes and poison. The old man sneered, mocking the notion and demanding, did Shuji really think a blacksmith would sell that? But he didn't dismiss him outright. The blacksmith snatched something from his pocket and hurled it skidding across the floor straight at Shuji. The old man flashed a crooked grin and announced the bear hide had once belonged to the beast that slaughtered 74 people. Alongside it, he slammed down a tiny jar, declaring it a deadly poison from the Miao tribe, then admitted he'd never bothered to verify if it was real. Shuji dropped into a crouch, snatched up the jar, and yanked the lid open. He scanned the scene, then coolly pronounced that the blacksmith had been conned. The old man scoffed again and muttered that he'd figured as much. Shuji shoved the jar into his cloak, admitting it wasn't genuine Miao poison, but grinning that it could still prove useful, and told the old man he'd be back tomorrow to collect the weapons he'd ordered. He inched toward the door when a flash against the wall snatched his attention. A jagged heap of bones lay tossed together like refuse. He skidded to a halt and demanded the blacksmith tell him what they were. The old man confessed he'd once used them to put down livestock, then fixed us with a hard look and asked, "Is something wrong with them?" Shuji leaned in, snatched up a bone, cradled it in his palm, muttered, "Not bad," and grinned as he claimed he'd borrow it until his order was ready. He didn't wait for permission. He snatched it up and bolted. The blacksmith stared him down as he walked off, muttering that the boy was a strange one. For a heartbeat, he half saw Shuji as a ghost, then snapped his head, spat a curse, and slammed the doubt away. Ghost or not, only one thing mattered. His daughter's killers had to be punished. He gritted his teeth and branded his life a cheap coin he'd gladly spend for revenge. That night, Shuji materialized at the Black Tao sect's main gate, facing 3 guards who stood watch in the dim moonlight. One of the guards spotted a shadow slipping from the dark and thundered at the figure, demanding his name and snarling that no one could pass during the important meeting. He wrinkled his nose at the rotten stench coming off whatever Shuji lugged, waved him away and told him to leave. And when silence answered, he barked the order again, furious and sure the boy couldn't hear. Shuji whipped the bone skyward and shattered the guard's chin with a single bone-crushing blow. He was snuffed out instantly. The other 2 guards froze, one sneering that the weapon in Shuji's hand was nothing but a horse's bone. Before they could even move, Shuji exploded forward and felled them both with the same ruthless precision. He scanned the bone, and a sudden realization hit him. It could still be useful. His gaze snapped to the Black Dao sect compound with icy resolve. Memories seared. Before his regression, more than half of the sect had escaped, and their counterattack afterward had shredded his forces. Scarred by that bitter lesson, he could still see their leader bolting the moment things went wrong, and this time he swore not a single one would escape. He'd kill every last one. A vow seared his thoughts as Shuji marched straight into the sect grounds, his steps a calm mask hiding the fire inside. With every stride, fresh corpses toppled, littering his path. Cross him and you were dead. He slaughtered anyone who dared stand in his way with savage, effortless brutality. He tore through the sect like a living shadow of death. He barreled into the main hall. One of the men yawned, snapped his head toward the commotion with sharp irritation, demanded to know what all the racket was, then smirked at Shuji and waved him off as nothing more than a brat who'd interrupted his nap. Another man, calmer, stepped forward and snapped that the sect leader was locked in a meeting with a guest, then glared at Shuji and warned he'd be dealt with swiftly. Shuji pinned the men with an icy glare, silently grading each as nothing more than second to third rate, then declared aloud that these had to be the Black Tao sect's 4 elites. They looked the part, but were they really? A man scoffed at his arrogance and lunged. Shuji didn't hesitate. He hammered his boot into the man's crotch. The victim hunched over as a gut-wrenching groan ripped from their throat. Shuji hurled himself at another. He rammed his fingers into the man's eyes, snatching away his sight. The other 2 ripped their swords free, every muscle coiling as they readied to strike. Shuji flung the horse bone like a jagged spear across the hall. It rockets into one of them, clocking them square in the face. It careened back in a wild ricochet. Shuji's hand shot out and snatched it from midair, and with a single savage swing, he pulverized the back of his head. He whirled to the man he'd crippled earlier as the wounded elite erupted into a savage, furious scream. Rage flared as he vowed to drag Shuji into the exact same searing agony. Shuji snorted, contempt dripping from every syllable. He ripped into the man, mocking how he plundered others without shame, yet exploded in outrage the moment someone took from him sneering that the biggest thieves howl the loudest when finally robbed. He booted a nearby vase, smashing it into the man, while Shuji, cold amusement in his voice, sneered that the man was getting worked up over nothing. He wasn't there just to grab their stuff. He'd come to snatch their very souls. He launched one last decisive swing. He obliterated the man's skull with a single savage strike, snuffing him out instantly. Another elite fallen. His eyes bulged. He muttered in disbelief that not even the Black Dao fought this ferociously. Storming into their headquarters armed with only a horsebone, this intruder couldn't be human. He wasn't a man, he was a monster. Shuji closed in, lips sealed. No word escaped him. A heartbeat-long silence. He whipped the bone with a bone-crushing blast hurled the man across the hall. It tore through the wall, plaster and beams exploding, and the lone survivor trembled. He clawed backward, trying to crawl away, stammering in terror as he demanded, "Who is Shuji? Who sent him?" Shuji's voice slashed through the room, ice-cold and merciless. The blacksmith. He tightened his grip and hurled another thunderous swing. Life towered over the corpses. Shuji scanned the wreckage, snarled that the Black Dao sect's 4 elites had been dealt with, decided that would cover the payment, then turned and stalked off, already scheming about the shopkeeper. That night the sky erupted into a crimson blaze, bathing the land in a menacing glow. Deep within the Black Dao sect's main chamber, 2 men sat opposite, tension crackling, when one shattered the silence with a contemptuous barb. "The mission failed. Both the master and the young master are furious," he snarled, berating the other. He spat that if they'd only pulled off passing the Black Dao sect off as mere forest bandits and stormed the Tiger Enforcement Bureau agency, they'd have seized the stolen cargo and the Jiao clan's reward money. Their incompetence ruined everything. Goryu Hu, sect leader of the Black Dao, shook with fury, fists clenching as he admitted the ambush had failed, and they'd lost too many men. Fearing that without the stolen goods, they couldn't even scrape together the tribute owed to the evil alliance. His voice turned to iron as he muttered the nightmare aloud. The money-collecting demon might appear, utterly unable to contain itself. Goryu Hao slammed his fist onto the table, mind racing. He'd already dispatched more than enough men to crush the Tiger Enforcement Bureau. Never in his worst nightmares did he imagine his forces would be obliterated. No one returned, and they were left groping in the dark about what had really happened. The other man snapped upright, sneering that they should have sent one of the 4 Black Dao elites from the start. Goryu Hao barked, fury snapping in his voice as he spat that if they'd been warned sooner about just how deadly strong the Tiger Pit sex guards were, none of this disaster would have happened. The man flashed a grin laced with poison, and slammed the table back with a thunderous crack. He spat that Goryu Hu was unfairly pinning the blame on them. Then his voice iced over. One more failure, and none of them would leave alive. Goryu Ho pressed his palm to his forehead and let out a heavy, defeated sigh, muttering that he understood, the words bitter in his mouth. The other man continued, voice cutting like ice. Only if the Tiger Enforcement Bureau botched the transport could the Tiger Pit sect be cornered, and if that failed, the young master's marriage plans would crumble. He sneered that the young master would never rest until he seized the girl he coveted. Goryu Hu exploded, roaring that he'd already understood and demanding the man stop repeating himself, his fury reverberating through the chamber until, suddenly, a deafening blast tore through the air. Both men froze, eyes snapping to the source. Goryu Hao's heart thundered in his chest as he realized the noise came from the entrance. The 4 elites were supposed to be guarding it. His features snapped shut into a grim mask. A heartbeat later, the door split the silence with a long, shuddering creak and swung open. Horror slammed into them. 4 severed heads clattered into the room. The fallen faces of Black Dao's 4 elites. Both men froze, jaws dropping as shock ripped the words from their throats. The Jiao clan representative choked on his words, eyes wide and voice breaking as he muttered that the 4 elites lay dead, trembling at the sick thought that the Orthodox sect had sent a master to annihilate them. Their fear surged as Shuji crept from the shadows, advancing with slow, deliberate steps. Panic exploded in the Jiao clan man as he scrambled to save himself, stammering he was from the Jiao clan and had nothing to do with the Black Dao, insisting he'd only come to negotiate and begging Shuji to believe him. Shuji's face went stone, his lips pressed into a tight line as he ground his teeth. Seeing Shuji falter, the man surged forward and offered to help finish him. Shuji spat a mouthful of blood straight into the man's left eye. The Jiao man howled, clutching his face, demanding to know what Shuji had done, and crying out that he'd sworn he wasn't part of the Black Dao. In a heartbeat, his late master's words slammed into Shuji's mind. Kokufu, those who master the supreme demonic arts become demon breakers, and a single drop of their blood is a lethal toxin that devours any martial artist from the inside. Shuji told himself his blood wasn't as potent as a true demon breaker's, but it would still scorch the man like a blast of searing chili powder. Half blind and seething, the Jiao man drew his blade and screamed, "What's wrong with Shuji?" before hurling himself forward with a ferocious strike. Shuji slipped the strike like it meant nothing, etching the moment into memory without a whisper. His martial skill blazed first-rate, but it still fell short of the 4 elites he'd already slain. A dark crimson aura exploded from Shuji, and the horsebone clenched in his fist. Both men snapped rigid with horror. The Joman spluttered, disbelief cracking his voice. They roared that Shuji couldn't possibly be using demonic arts. Desperation hurled the Jiao man forward. Wild-eyed, he bellowed that Shuji was no orthodox master but a mad demon. Shuji darted through the strike like lightning and swung a bone slammed into the man's foot, shattering his balance. The Jiao man crumpled to the ground, powerless, and in the next instant, Shuji slammed the bone down, the impact erupting in a thunderous crash. One strike and he was dead on the spot. Gu Yuho, remember that name. Sweat drenched Gu Yuho as his body shook and thoughts sprinted. He knew what he was seeing. Shuji wasn't just a warrior. He was a walking terror, and Gu Yuho's mind hissed that men like him shattered the line between orthodox and unorthodox. The whole martial world had sworn to destroy them. Demon users were, to him, evil incarnate. Savage beasts who slaughtered everything in their path until they reached a certain level of mastery. With Shuji glued to the Jiao man, Gu Yuho snatched the opening and slipped backward, inching away like a shadow. He dove for the hidden switch behind the bookshelf, panic clawing at his mind. If he could slip out, he might reach the evil alliance, and if that failed, maybe he could at least warn the martial alliance. A hidden mechanism snapped. The bookshelf lurched aside to reveal a tight, claustrophobic passage. And just as he was about to step through, Shuji's icy voice echoed behind him as Shuji shouted his name, demanding to know if it was truly him. Gu Yuhao stopped dead and spun around, his heart lurching. He couldn't believe Shuji was still sane. He'd mastered the demonic arts but never became a mindless beast. He wielded demonic energy with terrifying, razor-sharp control. Could this man actually be the pinnacle of stage mastery? The truth hit them like a thunderclap, and terror exploded in its wake. Gu Yuho crashed to his knees, forehead slamming the floor in a desperate bow, pleading for Shuji's forgiveness, and vowing that if spared, he'd do whatever was demanded. He blurted, panic shredding his voice. Today was the final deadline to pay tribute to the evil alliance. Miss it, and they'd behead him. Even Shuji might get thrown off his game. Shuji leveled an ice-cold stare at him, realizing Gu Yuho was far more perceptive than he'd expected. After a brief pause, he offered an alternative, then ordered him to abandon his martial arts. Gu Yuhao's body convulsed, his voice erupting into frantic stammers as cold disbelief slammed into him at full force. Shuji's gaze hardened to ice. He snarled that if Gu Yuhao refused, he'd kill him on the spot. Gu Yuhao's thoughts exploded. Bitter realization seared him. Surrendering his martial arts was no different from death. So if he was going to die anyway, he'd strike back one last time. A vicious snarl tore from his throat as he ripped his sword free. Shuji had already seen it coming. His voice ripped through the air, taunting him as nothing but a boastful coward. The horsebones whipped toward him. Gu Yuhao narrowly evaded the blow, but the crimson aura slammed into him and sent him staggering, and through gritted teeth he muttered in disbelief that Shuji's energy wasn't that of a true peak stage master. Then it hit him. Shuji was nothing but a second-rate warrior, and a wild grin ripped across his face as he barked that Shuji had the nerve to try and trick him, sneering at that brazen audacity. Shuji scoffed, his face a mask of icy disinterest, and branded Gu Yuho a clown. He snapped icily that his task would be easier now. Then his voice tore through the silence with finality, as he declared it was time to purge the Black Tao. Gu Yuho lurched and slammed into the ground, clawing at his skull as a raw curse ripped from his lips. Alien shivers crawled from the wound Shuji had dealt, and the wounded could only gape in stunned disbelief. He felt his mind scream, "Impossible! Did Shuji just pull off a sly trick with that last strike?" Shuji stalked forward, eyes like ice as he loomed over the fallen sect leader, sneering to Gu Yuho that he should be grateful. Gu Yuho's misunderstanding had made everything much easier. The sinister spirit lunged forward, cackling harshly as it howled that Gu Yuho must die with it. Madness ripped through Gu Yuhao. He snapped and launched a wild, desperate slash with his sword. Shuji deflected the strike and fired back with. He unleashed a razor-precise strike aimed straight at Gu Yuhao's left arm. Gu Yuho spat a curse and sprang forward to. He lunged, thrusting his blade, but Shuji blurred aside, and the strike ripped through empty air. Shock ripped through him as Gu Yuhao snapped. "What kind of movement is this?" He pegged Shuji as an assassin incarnate, feral yet iron-disciplined, wildly unpredictable but coldly deliberate. It was as if every motion existed only to kill, no matter the situation. Shuji ripped across the battlefield like a demon. He barely had time to steady himself when Shuji's fist crashed into his face with bone-jarring force. He crumpled to the ground, clawing at the air as jagged breaths ripped from his chest. Goo clung to you as you lay there. Shuji snapped a drifting scrap from the air, sneered as he muttered over the crimes it listed, then read aloud that Goryu Hao had kidnapped ordinary women and sold them into brothels. And then he bled them dry, funneling every coin to forge the Black Tao sect into the juggernaut it is today. Goryu Hu had borrowed massive sums from the Tiger Enforcement Bureau. As his crimes were read aloud, Goryu Hao collapsed into sobs, begging for his life, crying out to Shuji and hailing him a mighty warrior, swearing he had been wrong and promising that if spared, he'd never commit those sins again. Shuji let the desperate plea die, snatched a torch, and loomed over him with merciless, ice-cold eyes. Shuji snarled. How many people had once begged for their lives in front of Goryu Hu, just like I'm doing now? That, Shuji said, was the question. Shuji pressed the torch inches from Goryu Hao's face as the flames curled closer. The sect leader burst into uncontrollable sobs, begging again for forgiveness, and swearing he'd do anything. Shuji showed no mercy. He set Goryu Hao ablaze, flames swallowing him as his screams tore through the air. Shuji hoisted the bone he carried and declared, "This will at least ease some of the Tiger Enforcement Bureau's regret." On the verge of death, Goryu Hao's eyes snapped wide with terror as the Tiger Enforcement Bureau flashed through his mind, and a bone-deep realization slammed into him. Could this man be the root of all the recent troubles? He didn't even finish the thought. Shuji's weapon slammed down. Shuji planted himself like bedrock, jaw clenched and his gaze cutting through the room. Looming above the Black Tao's sect leader's corpse, he rasped under his breath, chest heaving. "So this is Goryu Hao." He strode away, grudgingly admitting that after everything, the man might actually be worth something. He burst from the chamber and the sound of voices outside slammed into him. They barreled toward the room, shouting for their master to hurry. They zeroed in on Shuji and demanded his name. Before he could answer, they cut him off, called it irrelevant, and screamed, "Kill him!" Shuji scoffed at their arrogance, lips curling as he said, "Looks like it's going to be a long night." By the next day, rumors raced like wildfire through the bustling streets. In the stables, the boys clustered, voices crackling as they traded breathless whispers and sizzling rumors. One boy burst out that a former servant of the Black Tao had told him the entire sect was annihilated overnight, and their estate burned to cinders. Another boy went pale, then snapped that they deserved it. Wu Tuyan, one of the stable boys, leaned in and spat out that the Black Tao had ravaged even their Tiger Pit sect. The others reeled and cried, "Tiger Pit was a victim too?" Wu Tuyan crowed that Black Tao had snapped up Tiger Pit's debts from the Chen Zhuang, and their men kept popping up to cause trouble. But with Black Tao obliterated, those I owe us were worthless, and Tiger Pit actually came out ahead. A boy blurted, eyes shining, that the warrior who'd vanquished the Black Tao was truly a hero of Anhui province, and Wu Tuyan's gaze snagged on Shuji dawdling nearby instead of working. Rage boiled in his throat as he roared at him, "Are you finished cleaning that horse dung yet?" Shuji fixed him with a cold, cutting stare that only fueled Wu Tuyan's growing fury. He stormed over, voice snapping, "What's that look supposed to mean? Got a problem, Shuji?" Annoyance flared inside Shuji. His hand twitched toward the gold token, poised to flash it and shut the boy up. Then he jerked it back. "Lie low until the Jiao clan's business is settled." Wu Tuyan snapped, his voice a whip. He'd had enough of Shuji's attitude and barked that the boy had better start listening the moment he was spoken to. Just as the fight threatened to erupt, a clear voice sliced through the noise and barked, "Stop!" Wu Tuyan went rigid the instant he heard it, terror tightening his throat as he whispered that he knew that voice. A young woman stormed in and ripped into Wu Tuyan, ordering him to stop picking on the newcomer. Shuji's heart slammed against his ribs and he froze the instant he saw her. She flashed a warm smile and admitted she wasn't well versed in their traditions. She slammed her point. The new recruits deserved consideration, and she implored Wu Tuyan to be patient. Wu Tuyan's voice splintered as he scrambled for an excuse, insisting it wasn't like that, and blaming the boy for refusing to listen. But the young woman, Koiko, pinned him with a glare and snapped that even a single fleeting meeting was fate. She implored him to treasure every bond. Life could flip on a dime. Maybe they'd cross paths again in some faraway place. Maybe they'd even become family. Wu Tuyan's scoff died in his throat. He was certain he'd never see Shuji again. Another boy muttered under his breath that nobody ever left Anhui province. Aiku then fixed her gaze on Shuji. Warmth radiated from his smile. She locked eyes and asked, "You're the new recruit?" Then promised, "If anyone dares mess with you, come straight to me." Shuji's eyes burst wide as he stared at her, mouth agape, a storm raging in his heart. Her face and voice had shifted in his memory, but those clear eyes were identical to the past. She hadn't changed at all, and the realization slammed into him, leaving him breathless with emotion. Shuji's smile lit the room, warmth flooding the air. He warned her, his voice like iron. If anyone bullied her again, she should storm in and tell him herself. Aiku's eyes snapped wide in disbelief, her mind going blank as she stammered, "What do you mean?" And from behind, Wu Tuyen exploded, roaring that Shuji was an idiot for daring to speak to the young lady like that. Aiku's smile flared brighter, her face softening into a warm glow as she nodded and whispered that she understood, and that she would. Later that night, darkness tightened its grip. Shuji snatched up the weapons. He flattened himself under the hay, peering down at them through a tangle of straw. He exhaled a hoarse whisper, tasting victory. Both escort warriors are avenged. And from here on, the shopkeeper seizes the spotlight. Rage ignited inside him as he tore off to hunt down the killer of his sworn brother. In Anhui province, Shuji tore through the night, urgency burning in his veins. He melted into the night, sliding like a living shadow straight for the Jiao clan manor. He vaulted over the walls, his movements razor-sharp from endless practice. He tore through the air like a living gale. They slunk into the grounds unseen, and a patrolling guard snapped to a halt. He tilted his head like he'd heard something. Before he could raise the alarm, Shuji slipped in behind him and finished it with one surgical pinpoint strike. He struck like lightning and snuffed the guard's life in a heartbeat. He seized the limp body and dragged it into a shadowed corner, letting the darkness swallow it, and slammed it into the shadows. It was only a heartbeat away. Two young attendants crept through the still night, whispers cutting the air. One blurted, nerves raw, that security felt unusually strict, and the other snapped, "Of course," after the Black Dao sect was wiped out overnight, shrugged it off as nothing to do with them. And her companion murmured agreement with a thin thread of unease in her voice. Shuji crouched low, swallowed by the shadows. I strained to listen as he swept the grounds with a cold, calculating gaze. He snapped a lone iron thorn, sending it skittering across the dirt at his feet. The man barreled forward and let out a savage hiss. Pain seared through him as a jagged caltrop skewered his boot. Shock flared across his face and he muttered in disbelief that they were iron caltrops. Before he could react further, Shuji plunged down on him, and with one fluid, merciless sweep the assassin felled him. He melted into the shadows and ghosted up onto the rooftop above. The man's body crumpled into a seat, utterly lifeless, and a nearby guard spotted the strange sight. He snapped at his companion, demanding why he sat idle when they hadn't even had a proper meal, while Shuji slipped unseen and tipped a small jar, dark liquid spilling over the food left out for the men. The irritated guard slammed into his seat and devoured his meal, grumbling under his breath. He stormed up to the guard, who ignored him as if he didn't exist. He spat a curse and demanded an answer. His words died on his tongue. Crimson dripped from his eyes, nose, and lips. Panic contorted his face as he staggered, whispering in horror about what was happening to him. He dropped to the ground, seized by violent convulsions, and the other guards instantly erupted in alarm. One screamed in disbelief that poison had been used and demanded the kitchen staff be seized. Another roared to slam the gates shut so no one could escape. Perched on the roof, Shuji watched with icy, calculating eyes, snapped the poison jar shut, and felt grim satisfaction. Proof the shopkeeper's skill was razor-sharp. The poison's taste wasn't bad at all, and he mused in silence. He admitted it to himself. He liked it. And now that his equipment had been battle-tested, he made up his mind. Now it was time for a visit that would get painfully, undeniably personal. Tonight, the Jiao clan bound to that cursed name would be wiped out. Inside the manor, several guards grumbled among themselves. One scoffed that the security was overkill and barely needed, while another grimly agreed, blaming it all on the Black Dao incident. Their idle chatter died mid-sentence. The window shattered into a spray of glass, and Shuji hurled himself through the gap like a streak of death. Before any of the men could even unsheath their blades, his spear blazed in the lamplight. With one merciless sweep he cut all three down. Their bodies crashed to the floor, limp and lifeless. As he barreled onward without breaking stride, he mounted the staircase with measured, unshakable steps, each one a quiet declaration. Another guard thundered down the stairs, caught sight of him, and mistook Shuji for a fellow sentry. He snapped that he was supposed to be posted on the 4th floor, and demanded what that thunderous racket had been, warning the master was already in bed and ordering Shuji to hush the others. Then he froze when he spotted a long spear in Shuji's hand, instead of the standard sword. Confusion slammed into the man, twisting his features into a deep, puzzled frown. Before realization could slam into his mind, Shuji hurled himself forward and rammed the spear clean through his own body. A single ragged gasp ripped from him. Then his life slipped away. Nearby guards screamed as they realized an assassin had slipped into the manor. They bellowed for reinforcements, accusing their comrades of abandoning them. then panicked and surged forward. Shuji stayed unshaken and flung a handful of iron thorns skittering across the ground. Screams ripped out of the men as their feet were pierced. He stumbled as a sudden pain ripped through him, dragging his steps to a crawl. Shuji thundered in, his spear stabbing out in a ruthless strike, and he pounded until every last one of them lay low, dead. Silence slammed over the manor, suffocating the rooms in a brutal, weighty hush. A calm, commanding voice sliced through the din from one of the rooms, scolding them for the racket. Shuji froze for a heartbeat, eyes narrowing to slits as his instincts screamed. A terrifying presence slammed into him, and he couldn't deny the voice belonged to someone whose inner power towered over even Goryu Hao. The door opened and an old man strode out, every inch of him radiating iron authority and lethal confidence. He sauntered forward, each step deliberate and unhurried. His expression hardened into stone as the old man snapped at Shuji. Even if you barged in uninvited, you still have to show basic manners. Shuji's gaze sliced the room, cold and unblinking. And inside he knew. At last he stood face to face with the man who slaughtered countless innocents for his own gain and hurled Aiko into hell. The old man fixed him with a penetrating stare, his aura a suffocating weight, and demanded what business had brought him here at such an hour. Shuji pinned the man standing before him with an ice-cold stare and snarled, "You're Jiao Yuxi. Behold the lord of the Jiao clan." Jiao Yuxi's face snapped shut as disdain laced his voice. He snarled at Shuji, "You insolent brat! Watch your tongue!" He demanded to know where Shuji had come from, snapping that the man showed no sign of any orthodox sect. And Jiao Yuxi guessed aloud, was this intruder tied to the Valley of Perdition, the path of supremacy society, or the distant lands beyond the Black Sands? Shuji measured Jiao Yuxi in dead silence, sensing chi knotted and warped yet razor-focused, and knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. Then he answered, voice steady as stone, declaring his allegiance to the Tiger Pit sect. Jiao Yuxi's eyes pinched in disbelief as he spat that it was unimaginable anyone raised by the Tiger Pit sect's master would end up like Shuji, then snapped a demand. What real ties does Shuji have to the sect? Shuji's lip curled into a frosty sneer as he spat, "I'm nothing but a guest, a servant warrior, or maybe even lower, a grubby stable hand." Jiao Yuxi barked a sharp laugh, snapped at Shuji that he wasn't about to give anything away so easily, then grinned coldly. It didn't matter where Shuji belonged. He'd already thrown himself into the lion's den. Jiao unsheathed his sword as a menacing, suffocating aura burst around him. He snarled that the only proper course was to kill without hesitation and thrust the question at Shuji. Did he agree? Jiao coiled like a spring, muscles locking as he readied his strike. Shuji shut his eyes for a heartbeat, staggering at the sight of Jiao Yuxi in the flesh. In his past life, that man had quietly lived out his years in peace. Aiku had been forced to choke on her tears, powerless to strike vengeance with her own hands. But now, Shuji's jaw clenched as he forced himself to believe things had changed. This life he'd seize her vengeance, and in a silent vow to Aiku he swore he'd exact that revenge for her here and now. The two warriors exploded into motion in perfect sync. Jiao's sword slammed into Shuji's spear, sparks erupting as the impact ripped a shockwave through the air. A thunderous shockwave sent the air reeling. Jiao lurched backward one step. They gaped, dumbstruck. The exchange slammed into them and left them reeling. His eyes snapped wide and he exploded. "No, this can't be real!" Rage boiled in his veins as he thundered. "Is Shuji using sorcery?" He felt the Jiao clan's internal art erupt from Shuji's body. Shuji's voice chilled the air as he shot back. "Why would you think that, Jiao?" Shuji drew a tight breath and gauged his spirit title. It erupted at the 9th level of the compression stage, putting him toe-to-toe with Jiao Yuxi, one of the era's top masters. He realized the fight wouldn't hinge on raw strength, but on the yawning gulf of experience a man living his second life held over his opponent. And then, Jiao Yuxi. They slammed into each other again, the impact snapping the air between them. They traded lightning-fast strikes, each one surgically precise. Jiao snapped, "Not bad, Shuji, those moves are solid." They saw the truth. Those techniques alone couldn't bring him down. Zhao's grin split his face as he scoffed inwardly, picturing Shuji reeling when a sudden blinding burst of flame struck. But Shuji, without warning, he launched himself forward, an absolute blur of terrifying speed. Blindsided, Zhao snatched a hairline dodge as the attack screamed past him. Shuji's spear raked across Zhao's neck, opening a shallow cut. Zhao's expression darkened, and with a grim smile he admitted Shuji was far scarier than he'd first believed. His head had nearly been severed. Then Zhao struck back. His blade barely nicked Shuji's side, and a cruel smirk split his face as he sneered that he'd almost spilled Shuji's guts. Shuji ground his teeth, rage flaring as he cursed Zhao's edge. His blows reached farther and moved with the slick, deadly rhythm of a battle-hardened master, so a decisive opening wouldn't come easy. He launched one of his weapons and it screamed, "Jiao!" Shuji sidestepped the attack with effortless grace. Jiao laughed, eyes glittering, and declared Shuji could even wield ranged weapons. Shuji flung a hammer skyward, yanking Jiao's gaze up. Jiao's grin widened as he surged forward with a blistering barrage. Admitting Shuji's tenacity only deepened his intrigue. Shuji burned to know what kind of eccentric master had raised him. Then, amid the clash, Jiao bellowed, "Surrender now, and I'll make you one of my retainers." Shuji snorted, his mind razor-cold. He saw Jiao's words as pure deceit, a smokescreen hiding another attack in the making. And at that moment, Jiao slammed his foot onto the floor. He unleashed a cataclysmic surge of forces. He unleashed a brutal strike, and Shuji twisted, desperately trying to evade it. He lurched and slammed into the fallen guard's lifeless body. He cursed under his breath as Jiao lunged like a coiled viper, lethal intent blazing while he bellowed, "This ends now!" He lunged, his sword ripping into Shuji and driving cold steel through his body. Jiao froze mid-step, jaw dropping when Shuji stayed silent, and he muttered, "That kid's got guts." He even compared him to his own son, sneering that the boy was a frail weakling who'd be bedridden by the slightest wound. Jiao confessed that's exactly why he'd sought a strong wife for the boy. He confessed in a fragile whisper that he couldn't say how many years he had left, and his only burning wish was to finally see his grandchild's face. Shuji's reaction hit him like a thunderclap, leaving him reeling. Shuji's hand darted to the sword buried in his body. He seized the hilt and held the blade planted with icy calm. Jay ripped at the blade, every muscle straining, but it refused to move. His face snapped into shock. He cried out in disbelief as he realized Shuji had halted the blade mid-arc. He did it with his own rib! His whole body jolted as the truth slammed into him. Shuji had left a deliberate opening just to bait him into attacking. Shuji's gaze was ice-cold. He told Jiao he'd reveal, down to the last year, exactly how long the clan lord had left. He spoke, and a crimson aura detonated around him. A crushing surge slammed forward, heavy and unstoppable. Fear ripped through Jiao. He couldn't believe he was even capable of feeling it. Every instinct screamed, "Run!" But his legs betrayed him, and he froze. Jiao Yuxi's heart thundered as he fought to shove himself backward and carve out distance. The pressure from Shuji's aura crashed over him, suffocating every breath, and Shuji's lips twisted into a vicious grin as he spat his enemy's name like a curse. Jiao Yuxi's composure shattered. Panic clawed up his throat and he spat curses under his breath as his mind locked onto one desperate aim: escape. Shuji's menacing aura crashed over him, crushing the air and stealing his breath. Ravenous jaws swallowed Jiao Yuxi and the crushing weight of Shuji's aura slammed down, and in that split second he lunged his spear forward. He slammed a devastating strike clean into Jiao Yuxi's chest. Blood spurted from Jiao's mouth as he staggered back, his body racked with pain. Trembling with disbelief, Jiao Yuxi gasped and demanded to know what that aura had been, muttering that it felt like an illusion, pure killing intent, and wondering aloud how a mere brat could possibly possess such a terrifying presence. A grin tore across Shuji's face, wide and cruel. He slammed the spear deeper into Jiao's body and told Jiao, voice cold as iron, that every battle he'd fought in his long life had been nothing but formal duels and sparring matches. Shuji summoned one last savage thrust and skewered Jiao Yuxi clean through. Venom laced his words as he spat that he'd been dragged into a war of foot soldiers, where clashes meant brutal slaughter or death. After surviving those years, this fight was nothing but child's play. Jiao Yuxi crumpled to the ground as his body betrayed him. Shuji let the spear fly. His hand shot out and snatched the hammer that lay within arm's reach. Jiao, voice ragged and paper-thin with death at his back, rasped a final plea, begging Shuji to spare his son, his voice cracking with desperation as he choked, "Not his son, please. Not his son." Shuji's glare froze the air as he hefted his hammer and snarled that the request was impossible. Then, without a second's hesitation, he slammed the weapon down and slammed a bone-crushing blow into Jiao Yuxi's head. Shuji's grin split his face as he sneered that Jiao would never lay eyes on his grandchild, wiped blood from his cheek with a hard, satisfied stare, and in the quiet of his thoughts, admitted he had to recover. Around him, spirits surged into whispers, their voices slithering through the silence. They cackled, egging him onward. They swore they could smell it, dragging him straight toward the scent. Shuji's eyes raked the room. His gaze snapped to a pot as the spirits pressed him forward, hissing that what he sought waited inside. Shuji smashed the pot, and from the shattered clay stumbled young Master Jiao, trembling and wide-eyed. Panic exploded from the boy as he hurled, "Don't come any closer, Shuji!" a piercing, frantic plea begging for help. Shuji glared down at him, cold as a blade, seething that scum like this had dragged so many others through hell. He lunged down, snatched the young master by the hair, and yanked him upright as the boy shrieked again in terror. Shuji sneered as the boy screamed, amused he still had breath, and jeered. Did being born into a family of money and power make you think you could own the world? Despair twisted the young master's face, tears carving rivers down his cheeks, as his whole body shook violently, racked by uncontrollable tremors. Shuji sneered and spat. Fine, I'll make you the star of the show. He leaned in, eyes boring into the boy's, and hissed with wicked glee. Tonight, I'm the star. At last, the long night drew to a close. Posters erupted across Anhui province, each one brandishing bleak, chilling words. When the orthodox sect secretly colluded with the Black Dao to fatten their pockets, someone struck back, punishing them in the victim's name, and the posted notices sent the town into a restless, whispering uproar. Gasps turned to shouted questions as the Black Dao sect and the Jiao clan manor were obliterated one after another. Whispers blamed a lone vigilante who slaughtered everyone but spared the servants, and many cheered it as justice. At last, the monsters who'd conspired against the Tiger Pit sect lay vanquished. Whispers ignited as people clawed at every clue, desperate to unmask the vigilante. He roared that neither Guyu Ho nor Zhao Yuxi had been ordinary opponents. And at the same time, whispers ignited among the stable boys as Wu Tuyen burst out that he'd heard something from a woman who once worked at the Jiao clan manor. His companions leaned in, bantering. Why did he always know these tales? And laughed that a man with a face like his must attract every female fan. Wu Tuyen snapped them into silence with a scowl and demanded they listen, then said the woman insisted the vigilante had called Zhao Yuxi's name 3 times before killing him. The stable boys' eyes snapped to each other, panic sparking between them. One demanded why anyone would give it that name. Another shivered, whispering that the vigilante summons victims by calling their names 3 times to drag them into the underworld. Someone muttered that if true, the man was terrifying. Another asked whether such a monster would ever join the Tiger Pit section. At that moment, the stable door ripped wide as a voice bellowed, "He's here!" And the stable boys jerked back, quaking with pure terror. Elsewhere, Koiko glided by on horseback, cantering in a calm, unhurried rhythm. Her thoughts skittered, circling the name people whispered, the vigilante of 3 calls to the underworld, who had crushed the Black Dao sect and razed the Jiao clan manor. She admitted that, wicked or not, celebrating someone else's ruin felt wrong. Still, her mind kept tearing itself apart trying to name the vigilante. Could it be a ghost? The thought iced her blood and ignited a fierce curiosity. But what haunted her most was why every one of the vigilante's moves kept tipping the scales in the Tiger Pit sect's favor. Her mind snapped to the memory of her sister's letter, its contents rushing back like a tidal wave. Aika wrote that a lone vigilante had fended off a bandit ambush in the forest, saving the escorts and supplies. She slid her gold medallion into his hand, implored him to seek out the Tiger Pit sect, and begged Koiko to welcome him like kin if he ever arrived. Yet, Koiko realized with a jolt, not a single guest had arrived wearing a gold medallion. Her thoughts swallowed her whole until the horseman's short, sharp tug on the reins yanked her back. A jolt yanked her from her reverie. She blinked and blurted, "Where are we?" A sharp, involuntary gasp ripped from her as awe crashed over her at the sight before her. She gasped, eyes wide as the lake spread before her, shimmering like a polished mirror. She spun to the man guiding her horse, grin blazing, and demanded, "How did you know I love lakes? Did I ever tell you?" The horseman, revealed as Shuji, shot back that she had. Koiko blinked at him, confusion twisting her features as she muttered she didn't remember ever saying that. A single, silent thought ignited in Shuji's heart. It hit him like lightning. In their past life, whenever frustration clawed at her or her mind twisted into turmoil, she'd always slip away to the lake and sit on the shore. Shuji plunged his hand into his pocket, readied the small thing he'd pulled out, and planted it on the tiny plate. Koiko leaned in, voice sharp. "What is that?" As smoke unfurled, curling quietly into the surrounding air. Her eyes snapped to it and she cried, "That's insect-repellent incense." Then she smiled, and confessed she loved the lake. The bugs always wrecked it for her. She flashed a warm smile, told Shuji he was incredibly considerate for a newcomer, asked if he'd been like that at his last job, and Shuji froze for a heartbeat before answering. He told her that a warrior sacrificed himself for the one who finally saw his worth. To those who treated him like family, he repaid them with fierce, unwavering loyalty, claiming them as kin. Koiko froze. Silence swallowed him. Confusion clouded his eyes, and shock slammed into him with the weight of those words. After a moment, she murmured she'd never pry into his circumstances. And as long as he was at Tiger Pit, they were his family. She lunged her hand toward him. In that instant, Shuji's mind snapped back to that last heartbeat with her, the final spark before he slid back into regression. Her voice slammed back into his memory, asking, could he even fathom why she'd saved him? She proclaimed, eyes blazing, that she was the heiress of the Tiger Pit sect. She swallowed his promise that the master and his wife were good people. And from that moment on, she'd begun to claim him as family. Now that hit her like a punch. Shuji inched his hand toward hers, breath caught. Then the moment shattered before his fingers could touch her skin. Wu Tuyen stormed onto the scene. He roared, "The escorts have returned!" Koiko's face burst into joy. She spun her horse away, eyes blazing with excitement, while Shuji froze, his hand hanging in the air as he stared blankly at it. Koiko spun back, shot a quick apology his way, announced she was heading on ahead, and added there'd be a banquet that night, reminding him to save room. She spurred her horse and surged forward. Shuji scoffed under his breath. Then a sly smile crept across his lips. He exhaled softly. Not so bad either. Later that night, the grand banquet inside the Tiger Pit sect erupted into life. The hall roared with laughter, cups clanged, and the air swelled with the heady scent of roasted meat and fragrant seek. From the head of the hall, Koganen sprang to his feet, hoisted his cup high and thundered a toast to head escort Shuji, hailing him as the hero of their long, perilous journey. The crowd exploded into thunderous cheers, answering with a roar. Cheers! Drink to your heart's content today. Long live the Tiger Pit sect. And the central tables buzzed with wild, jubilant revelry. A charged hush clung to the stable boys at the back. Shuji sat motionless, sipping with a blank, unreadable face. Right then Wu Tuyen, one of the stable boys, strode up behind him and slammed a heavy hand onto his shoulder. He sneered. Who does Shuji think he is, daring to accompany the young miss? The other stable boys jeered, crowing that only the old guards had the right to escort her. Wu Tuyen snatched the food right out from in front of Shuji and sneered. They snarled that even a hint of arrogance would cost him his meal. The crowd surged in, roaring, "No food for someone like you," and spitting, "Arrogant brat." But Shuji stayed stone cold, his icy calm only lighting their anger hotter. Koiko stormed over, her razor voice slicing through the jeers as she demanded what they thought they were doing. And they recoiled under her glare when she called them out for bullying Shuji. Again, Wu Tuyen blurted a lie, swearing they'd only brought him food to share, and another stable boy echoed it, his words stumbling from raw nerves. Aiku exhaled a soft, wary sigh. She wouldn't be fooled. And, with careful fingers, plucked a mochi from her plate and offered it to Shuji. Her eyes burned with worry as she leaned close and reminded him, "If anyone bullies you, tell me." She studied his face, asked if he was eating properly and whether they were denying him food, then pressed him again. "You must tell me." Her father's voice cut through the air, calling her name. Koiko reluctantly turned to Shuji, told him she had to go, urged him one last time to eat well, then walked away. The stable boys seethed with resentment as Wu Tuyen erupted, demanding to know how Shuji had managed to win the young Miss's favor. Another snarled that Shuji was nothing but a kid compared to them. And a third spat that the only reason he was treated kindly was his face. Wu Tuyen sneered, snarling he'd do it only because the young miss had ordered it. They'd feed him after all. Spite twisted his grin as he snatched the food and hurled it at Shuji, yelling for him to eat. Shuji slid aside with a lazy flick, deliberately letting the food sail past and miss him entirely. Rage flared in the stable boys as they shouted for him to stop dodging, and then bombarded him with food, volley after volley. Shuji moved like liquid, dodging every throw with effortless grace. Only the bits of meat found their mark, which he snapped from the air and swallowed without a second thought. The boys erupted in fury, shouting he was mocking them, that his expression was infuriating, and vowing to beat the arrogance out of him. Meanwhile, up at the head of the banquet, once again Koganen seized the hall, lauded Shuji for ensuring their caravan returned safely, and declared that at last everyone could breathe easy. His wife stepped forward and, swearing on her honor, vowed to take full responsibility for the families of the escorts who had died until the end. Shuaika took the seat of honor, bowed, and in a grave, steady voice declared that no one should worry about the fallen escorts' families. She had only done her duty. Koiko slid to her side, a teapot cradled in steady hands. Someone slid her a drink with a soft tilt and thanked her for her service. Shuaika's voice brimmed with gratitude, and Koiko then dropped the name of the guest with the gold plaque referenced in the letter. Shuaika admitted she'd been dying to ask about that person, said she hadn't seen them, and wondered if they'd actually arrived at the Tiger Pit sect. And Koiko shook her head, saying they hadn't. She promised that if they had, they'd have been welcomed as an honored guest. Shueika threw his lot in with regret. She revealed the guest to be a spear-wielding vigilante who, despite his youth, he unleashed overwhelming power and obliterated the Green Forest bandits, who were in truth members of the Black Dao sect. Regret strangled her. She couldn't thank him again, and she clung to the thought that if she could recruit such a master as a retainer, her sect's strength would grow, and no more of her subordinates would have to die. Koiko draped a gentle hand over Shueika's, and dared her to drown her worries and regrets in a drink, then reminded her that thanks to her hard work. That night, a sea of faces erupted into beaming smiles. A tidal wave of emotion slammed into Shueika, her thoughts tumbling as she swept a stunned gaze across the hall. Smiles erupted across every face in the crowd. It slammed into her. She and her subordinates had bled and battled to defend this peaceful, everyday life. Her gaze snapped to the stable boy's table. Her breath died in her throat the instant her eyes locked on Shuji. The cup clattered from her trembling hands as she stood shaking, disbelief ripping through her. Her eyes snapped to the brat she'd seen before. He was sitting right there. Shuji met her stare without breaking stride, darting and weaving through a hail of hurled food. He lifted a finger to his lips, a single sharp command that froze her into silence. Shueika's heart hammered in her chest, sweat slicked her skin, and a scream clawed at her throat. Shuji's icy inner voice slammed into her. "Not yet," it snapped. "The gold plaque is off limits, and until then she must never breathe a word about him." The stable boys lay spent, chests burning as they gulped air. Wu Tuyan, cursing through ragged breaths, barked at Shuji to stop moving. Steeling themselves for one last desperate strike, the group surged as one to pounce on him. Just as they closed in, a strange sound ripped through the banquet hall. It erupted from right beside their table. A mysterious man slammed the wooden bell with a jagged shard of bone. His calm voice cut like a blade through the noise, demanding silence so he could eat. Wu Tuyen scowled, spat out a furious tirade, shouting that the man should thank the sect master for letting a beggar like him into the feast, and sneering that he reeked and should wolf down his food and be gone. Grinning with dark amusement, the mysterious man branded him feisty, then slid a hand forward and murmured he'd have to teach the boy a lesson. Wu Tuyen snapped, demanding what he was mumbling, and just as a stranger reached to grab him, Shuji shot in and yanked him back. Surprise slammed into him and his eyes snapped wide. He flashed a sharp, approving grin, praising Shuji's lightning reflexes and saying instincts like that meant the boy would go far. Then the man snapped to his feet. He pinned Wu Tuyen with a venomous glare and spat that Wu Tuyen should spend the rest of his life in debt to the boy who'd just saved him. The stable boys gaped, baffled, as the stranger spun on his heel and strode away. Wu Tuyen hissed that the man must be insane. The mysterious figure strode into the banquet center and bellowed, his voice exploding through the hall so every ear heard. He flashed a grateful grin, hoisted his cup, and thundered his thanks to the sect for inviting him to their sumptuous banquet. He groaned in dismay. His sake was stone cold. Grinning, he vowed he'd personally ladle steaming cups of sake for everyone. He hurled himself onto the table where the sect leader sat. He pressed a fingertip softly to the wooden surface. He erupted, unleashing a savage surge of inner energy. The sake on the table shuddered warm, steam snapping up before it burst into a furious boil, and finally it vaporized into absolute nothingness. A sly chuckle escaped him as he feigned regret for overheating it, and watched the fine sake vanish in a plume of steam. Shueika sat frozen, shock slamming into her. She knew instantly that, using only his internal energy, this man wielded a mastery that screamed he'd reached the very pinnacle of power. Koganon leapt to his feet and thundered, "Who are you, monk?" A sly grin curled on his lips as he shot back, "I'm no monk." Though he'd snatched the wooden fish on his way there, he strode forward and declared his name like a battle cry. He roared that he was the money-collecting demon of the Unorthodox Alliance, once feared as the staff demon. Then he hurled his name at everyone there. Goryu. They dubbed him the staff demon, Goryu, once infamous as one of the twin demons tore across the martial world unchecked, laying waste to everything in their path. He threw down with the evil alliance, battled their leader and was crushed. Since then he's been pressed into their service, hunting down overdue tributes from delinquent organizations, and any who resist have their entire sect erased. Koganon locked eyes on him, suspicion coiling in his throat as he muttered, "Could this be the very man Shueika had handed the golden plaque to?" Shueika shot him down on the spot, declaring this wasn't the man, and swearing she'd never seen him before either. Goryu sat at the head of the banquet table, his massive frame dominating the room as he poured wine into a cup in a slow, deliberate trickle, then turned and addressed the hall. He casually announced it had been ages since he'd set foot in Manhwa, and that, in his absence, word had come that both the Black Tao sect and the Jiao clan manor had been crushed. The moment he spoke, a crushing pressure slammed into the banquet, choking everyone around him. He sneered that, with the way things stood, a loud, raucous banquet would guarantee they'd be dragged into suspicion. Shueika froze solid, shock ripping through them as his oppressive aura crashed down. Koganen snapped, insisting it was nothing but coincidence, and swearing their sect had no hand in those events. Goryu's smile turned ice-cold as he sneered. If that's really true, then go on. Resume your banquet as if nothing happened. His hawk-like eyes snapped to the back of the hall. He murmured he'd heard the rumors before, but seeing her with his own eyes proved she was even more formidable than the stories claimed. His eyes snapped to Koiko, a jolt of surprise ripping through him. Koiko snapped, "What are you talking about?" Goryu roared with laughter, declaring he'd heard the Jiao clan had been so dazzled by her beauty it ruined them. Now that he saw her with his own eyes, he knew exactly why. He spat that taunt with that sneer. No wonder Sector 2 might have. They crumpled before her, undone by her beauty. He unleashed a booming laugh, snapped in front of her until his breath ghosted her cheek, and demanded, "What did you think would happen when someone powerless was born this beautiful?" Before she could answer, he spat squarely into her face. Koiko froze, trembling with fear and humiliation as Goryu grinned wickedly, proclaiming that a woman like her was destined to endure such undeserved humiliation. Then he burst into manic laughter, his crude cackle filling the hall. His laughter was ripped apart by the scream of drawn blades as Koganen and Shueika snapped their weapons up, cold steel leveled at Goryu. Koganen roared, demanding an explanation for his actions, and snarling that if Goryu had come here only to provoke a fight, he shouldn't expect them to sit idly by. Goryu, unbothered, nonchalantly tore off a chunk of meat and chewed with lazy contempt, sneering, "Did you really think you could defeat me?" Koganen glared like winter and snapped that this wasn't about winning or losing. He'd watched someone insult his daughter right before his eyes, and for that alone he refused to let the matter rest. He barked for Goryu to step outside to spare the innocents. Goryu scoffed there was no need to leave, and he snapped they'd settle it then and there. At the last heartbeat before disaster, Koiko lunged into the gap, seizing the moment and stopping the clash cold. She implored her father, voice cracking, to sheath his sword. With icy calm she wiped the spit from her cheek, locked eyes with Goryu, and thanked him for the important lesson he'd taught them. And with a demure curtsy, she tilted the bottle and filled his cup with crimson wine. Goryu blinked, baffled, scoffing that she'd been spat on and still dared to offer him a drink. Then he jeered, calling the daughter of a warrior clan pathetic. Koiko's voice cut through. She wasn't enduring humiliation to grovel. Goryu had climbed to the summit of mastery, a true senior of the martial world, and she bowed only as a junior warrior honoring his achievements. Goryu's face went black. He ground his teeth and let out a derisive laugh. After all his great warrior boasting, all he'd done was spit on a girl, and he sneered, "Don't you find that ironic?" Koiko replied, voice steady, admitting her words might have fallen short and sounded that way, but every word came from her true, sincere feelings. She dropped into a deep bow, thrust another cup forward, and implored him to accept it. Silence swallowed the air. Then Goryu suddenly, his hearty laugh swelled, then burst into a booming, room-shaking roar. He took the cup and downed it in a single, defiant gulp. Everyone's jaw dropped as he flashed a sly smile, apologized for his earlier rudeness, and calmly asked the sect leader to sheath his sword. He snapped that he was doing it to spare Kojanin's pride, and insisted they end it right there. Kojanin scoffed, then relented, forcing his blade downward until the tip dipped toward the earth. As Goryu strode past him, a savage sneer curled his lips as he spat that if he'd been 50 years younger, he'd have claimed Koiko for himself. He froze with his hand on the doorknob, a heartbeat away from walking out. He skidded to a halt, spun back, and blurted he'd nearly forgotten the most important matter. Since the Black Dao sect had been destroyed, he hadn't collected the tribute they owed him. Coming back empty-handed would tarnish his name. Koganen's eyes narrowed as he snapped, "What exactly are you implying?" Goryu lunged forward, a cruel grin curling his lips as he snarled. He didn't care whether the Black Tao sect fell or the Jiao clan manor burned, only that the required sum came back with him. And he reminded them he'd just saved Koganen's face, so now Koganen owed him. Cool as ice, Kojanon leveled his gaze and asked bluntly, "Was Goryu really trying to levy tribute on the clans of the orthodox sects?" Goryu sneered, deriding the word tribute and rebranding it a consolation fee. And Koganen shot back, had he demanded that same fee from the Namgang clan? Goryu sneered, "If I'd tried that, I'd already be dead at the Namgung Patriarch's hands." He whirled back to Koganen, snapping that the Tiger Pit sect had pocketed a fortune on their last trip, ordered them to call it condolence money for the poor souls of the fallen Black Dao sect, and then, after a long pause, asked whether that sounded more acceptable now. Eyes snapped to Kogonen's side as reluctant nods broke out, and they begged for more time before he could finish. Goryu slammed his staff into the ground like a thunderbolt, the impact shattering the floor and gouging a deep crater. His voice cut like a blade as he warned that time was precious to everyone. Kogonon slammed his hands to his skull as panic surged. Provoke the staff demon, and the Tiger Pit sect would be annihilated tonight, and even pleading the Namong clan might not save them. At the end, he knew there was only one option left. Eyes locked on the crater Goryu had blasted, Kogonen snapped for every last coin to be hauled forward. A heavy sack, bulging with gold and silver ingots, crashed down at Goryu's feet. Laughter rumbling in his throat, he lunged forward to inspect the money, and Koganon thundered that it was being handed over only on the condition that Goryu would not lay a single finger on anyone from the Tiger Pit sect. Goryu rolled the ingots between his fingers with a satisfied grin, snorting that he wasn't a monster and knew the bounds of decency, then mocked that Koganon, of all people who handed him money willingly, radiated a murderous aura, and waved it off as he declared he'd accept the fee gratefully. Just as he turned to leave, he hurled a single gold ingot toward Koiko. He declared it his apology for spitting on her earlier. Koiko dropped her head, silence settling like a weight, while Koganon curled his hands into white-knuckled fists, frustration roaring inside him but no sound left his lips. Finally, Goryu spun toward the exit, laughter ripping from his throat. He waved them off. No escort needed. The moon blazed overhead, carving a silver road he could follow perfectly on his own. Later that night at the stables, two stable boys huddled and whispered. One said he'd heard the escorts whisper that Goryu could single-handedly kill every person at the banquet. The other said it was lucky they'd settled it with money. Once someone was dead, it was over. And both agreed the thought of such a man was terrifying. Right then, Wu Toyan barreled into the stables. Sweat-soaked and gasping for air, he staggered forward, clutching a bundle of food. They lunged forward, eyes wide, demanding what he clutched. Certain the ruined banquet had left them starving. They hailed him as a hero for always thinking of them. Wu Tuyan cut them off, shoved their questions aside, and demanded, "Where is Shuji?" The stable boys owned up. None of them had laid eyes on him in ages. Silence slammed down. Wu Tuyan froze, then let Shuji's name slip from his lips like a fragile confession. Memory slammed him back to the moment Goryu's strike nearly felled him. Shuji hurled himself in to take the blow, and a fierce fire ignited in his chest. A sudden rush of feeling ripped out of him, and he hurled his longing into the night, his voice tearing through the stables as he cried, "Shugi! My beloved Shugi! Where are you right now?" Elsewhere, the world shimmered beneath the moon's silver glow. Grinning ear to ear, Goryu sauntered out of the banquet and made a beeline for the wooden bridge. He closed the distance. A lone figure waited on the other side. He froze in his tracks, eyes narrowing into cold slits as the figure snapped into focus. He knew them. Shuji emerged, a menacing aura crackling around him. Goryu scoffed, sneering that he'd almost mistaken the figure for a monster, only to realize it was a man after all. He froze. This was the stable hand he'd seen earlier that evening. He spun on him and demanded, "Why did you follow me?" He sneered that maybe Shuji had shown up over the insult he'd flung at his lover. And if he came for her, his revenge was a fool's errand. He owned up to spitting in her face. She didn't flinch. His insult died on the spot, and he knew there was nothing left to gain from revenge. Shuji finally shattered the silence, ice threading his voice as he told Goryu that maybe his half-hearted monk imitation was why he kept spouting such nonsense. He barked, "Enough chatter." Shuji stepped forward slowly, and then, in an instant he sprang at Goryu with his spear, roaring for him to hand over the money as the spear sliced through the air toward him. Goryu erupted into thunderous laughter. He weaved through the flurry of strikes, his voice booming across the bridge as he roared that no one had said those words to him in 40 years. The last who dared demand that was the rogue Night King. And now Shuji was the latest. Laughter exploded from him, and he couldn't stop. He swung his staff and slammed it into Shuji's weapon in a thunderous clash. The impact blasted Shuji backward. He scrambled for footing and locked his eyes on his trembling spear. Goryu's grin turned wolfish as he hailed the spear a masterpiece and snapped, "What's its name?" Shuji's voice cut like ice. "It has none." Goryu shook his head. What a pity. Such a small heirloom yet a finely made weapon. And he flicked his staff into a dazzling spin. Then it slammed to a halt. He jabbed at it and said it had been a spear. When the blade snapped, he turned it into a club. Forged from black iron, it was brutally durable but crushingly heavy. And that weight would have been its only flaw if the blade had stayed intact. They would have dubbed him the Spear Demon instead of the Club Demon, he admitted with a bitter edge, that it was truly regrettable. His words died before he could finish. Fuji shook the wooden bridge until the planks rattled, then roared that no matter how sturdy it was, It was still only a spear without a blade. Suji lunged forward again, snapping that it was like a rogue-style wolf with its fangs ripped out. Just like Goryu himself, his balance faltered and he lurched. Rage ripped from him as he roared that Suji was a filthy creature. He dove aside at the last heartbeat as the attack shredded the space he'd just left. The spear skimmed his cheek and nicked the brim of his straw hat. A pained groan tore from him. He planted his feet, sent his staff whirling like a cyclone, and thundered that striking treacherously in a duel between men was the act of a coward. In a flash, he snapped his spin into a stabbing thrust at Shuji. Shuji's eyes flared. He'd already read the intent. He snapped sideways, slipping out of the strike's path. He latched onto the bridge's rope. He flung himself to the side. His hand shot into his pocket, and he unleashed a storm of iron caltrops that rained down on his opponent. Goryu roared as he sprang back, sneering at the move as a coward's trick and vowing it would never work on him. He spun his staff in a lightning arc, sending the remaining caltrops clattering harmlessly aside. Shuji shot sideways again and spat right at him. Goryu's eyes snapped to it. He tilted his head aside with a smirk, conceding Shuji was far more relentless than he'd expected. He whipped his staff through the air, sneering, "Were you so furious you spat on your lover and called him a naive fool?" Shuji spun backward mid-air, scraping past the staff as it thundered by. It slammed into his palm. He flung another handful of caltrops, spat once more, and his leg whipped out in a wide kick. At first the spit whizzed past, missing its mark. He snatched it mid-motion with a lightning-fast sweep of his foot. He whipped his leg and booted it square into Goryu's face. A scream ripped from Goryu as the spit seared his skin where it landed. He staggered, disbelief choking his words as he muttered that the spit itself was burning, his mind racing. Was Shuji a poison user from the Sichuan Tang family? Sight collapsing into a smear, he could barely see as Shuji surged in, closing with grim, unbreakable determination. He clenched a hammer in his right hand, flung his spear aside and brought it crashing down toward Goryu's head. Goryu lashed out with his staff in a frantic, blind arc, but Shuji surged forward without hesitation. Goryu's eyes locked on him, desperate to decode every twitch. They flung themselves backward at the last heartbeat, the next strike smashing into empty air. Panting, he steeled himself from a distance. He spat out the confession. He'd underestimated Shuji. He never imagined a mere stable hand could pack this kind of strength. Even as he talked, he muttered under his breath that it couldn't be right. No way Shuji had trained under the Tiger Pit Sect. His moves shredded their textbook forms, wild and defiantly unorthodox. They ripped up the rulebook and laughed at every scrap of form and decorum. It slammed into Goryu. His entire body was a killing weapon. He ripped the cloak from around his neck as Goryu roared. He didn't care what kind of demon or fiend Shuji was. He snarled he'd drag him straight into hell with his own hands. He hoisted his staff high and snapped into a lethal battle stance. Shuji lunged for his abandoned spear, ripping it back into his grip with a feral snarl. A string cinched around his hand. A dark aura coiled around him as he dropped into his stance, his voice ice-cold as he spat that Goryu talked far too much. The two men locked eyes, their glares slicing the air between them. Tension pulsed through the night as a gust tore across the bridge, whipping the leaves into a frantic rustle. They coiled like springs, breath held. The instant a single leaf struck the earth, they lunged forward in perfect unison. Their weapons slammed together in a thunderous crash, the impact rocking the ground. The impact ripped a shockwave through the air, throwing the wooden bridge into a violent shudder. An arm tumbled from the bridge and plummeted into the yawning depths, and when it slammed the ground, a scream ripped through the night. Shuji rooted himself, ice-calm and rock-steady. Goryu stood before him, cackling like a madman as blood poured from his wounds and a feral grin cut through the agony. He roared that losing his arm had been a brutal price, but it was worth it. He had won. The staff drove through Shuji's chest, and he crumpled to his knees. Just minutes earlier, Goryu and Shuji's weapons slammed together, sparks flying as metal screamed in a thunderous clash. Sparks erupted, flying in every direction. Shuji's spear skidded sideways, missing its mark. Razor-sharp instinct steered his every move, and a brutal arc of steel screamed toward Goryu's head. As the blade bore down, Goryu flashed a grin and murmured, "Not bad." He slid sideways and snarled, "Shuji, you can have my left arm, only if you hand me your heart." At that instant, his staff drove straight through Shuji's chest, splattering blood across Shuji's face. Goryu's grin went feral, teeth flashing as he snarled that the boy's heart was his. After a heartbeat-long pause, Goryu yanked his staff free. Blood geysered from Shuji's body. He towered over his fallen opponent, voice like ice as he admitted out loud. He'd won, but the victory had come at a brutal cost. His jaw dropped. A brat like Shuji posing a real threat was unthinkable, so he suspected Shuji had been raised on a demonic path. Suddenly he tore into a violent cough and spewed blood. cold dread crashing over him as he realized the internal damage he'd sustained was far worse than he'd thought. He yanked the staff up and drove it towards Shuji's chest, his mind racing with one brutal fact. This brat was too dangerous to leave alive. It had to end here and now. He lunged to strike, but terror slammed into him and froze every muscle solid. Spirits poured out from behind Shuji, writhing in the shadows as his body slowly hauled itself upright. Goryu lurched back, eyes bulging, a raw cry of disbelief ripping from him. He roared, "What's keeping Shuji on his feet? Money, pride, fighting spirit, or love? What could possibly drive him forward after wounds like that?" Shuji staggered forward, his body trembling, and he forced his head up with a raw, desperate heave. He parted his lips inch by inch and forced out a single trembling word: fear. Goryu recoiled at the sound, his face contorting with unease, and he snapped, "What do you mean, Shuji?" Shuji glared back like a coiled viper, his eyes cutting into him as he demanded, "Do you know where people go when they die?" He snapped his head down, eyes locking onto the shadowed ground beneath the bridge, where the earth's belly split and a deep, yawning pit burst open from within. Spirits screamed, their agony tearing the silence apart, clawed frantically, fighting inch by inch upward. Shuji's voice cut like ice as he warned that anyone who believed that fate awaited them after death could never let themselves die. And Goryu forced a shaky smirk, scoffing that Shuji was hallucinating. Fear screamed through his thoughts. Was Shuji really standing from sheer terror of death? What had he seen to ignite that brutal strength? Goryu couldn't deny it. He was burning to know the truth, but he steeled himself. He wasn't about to die for the answer. He recoiled, taking a sharp step back. He brandished his weapon again and bellowed he would not die on this bridge. He'd die peacefully in his bed as a frail old man. A roar ripped from him as he swung his staff again in a savage arc, and Shuji slammed his spear up to stop the blow. He ground his teeth, jaw clamping down like iron. He charged forward and unleashed a savage swing, determination roaring through him. Goryu charged him head-on, and their blades slammed together in a relentless roar of ringing steel. Tempers ignited as their words sliced through the air. Shuji severed two of Goryu's fingers, and Goryu answered with a crushing strike that tore into Shuji's left side, as blood and sweat slicked the wooden planks, and their brutal dance raged on. Goryu clicked his tongue at his severed fingers, a guttural growl ripping out as he snarled that Shuji had taken two from him, then leveled a wicked glare and spat that Shuji was finished. Before Shuji could react, a jagged shard of metal impaled Goryu's eye. He howled in agony and reeled backward. Through clenched teeth he demanded, what had Shuji just spat out? Shuji, ice calm, gnawed the iron caltrop shards in his mouth, and vowed Goryu would die here today. Terror slithered into Goryu's movements, turning every motion ragged and desperate. He lashed out with his staff, roaring for Shuji to stay back. Blow after blow slammed into Shuji, but he planted his feet like iron and refused to fall. Panic clawed at Goryu's thoughts as his mind raced. Shuji should have been fatally wounded, so why was he still charging forward? What kind of creature was he? Desperation clawed at Goryu as he howled, "Shuji is a demon!" and flung his staff with every ounce of strength. The heavy weapon slammed into Shuji's skull. The blast vaporized half of it. Goryu went stone still for a heartbeat, then exploded into wild laughter, flinging his head back and cackling as certainty surged through him, and he roared inside that this was his victory. He snatched Shi into his palm, rocketed forward with a savage grin, and roared he'd end Shuji's misery with a single strike. Before he could strike, Shuji sidestepped in a blur, moving with jaw-dropping speed. Goryu's eyes exploded open in disbelief as Shuji's blade sliced through the bridge's rope. Terror exploded inside him, devouring every brave thought. He was convinced he'd shattered Shuji's skull. He shouldn't still be moving. When did he sever the rope? The bridge shuddered as its supports snapped and it began to collapse. Shuji plants himself on the collapsing planks as Goryu rockets, desperate, for the far side. He slammed onto the far side, gasping, his heart hammering out of rhythm as a suffocating presence bore down on him, and spirits rose behind him, their whispers clawing at his mind. Panic slammed into Goryu. Could Shuji still be alive? It made no sense. Those wounds were savage. Survival looked impossible. Maybe just a desperate, futile fight before death. Yet the truth his gut screamed would not be silenced. Shuji never answered to common sense. He snapped his head around, horror searing through him. I spotted Shuji hovering in midair. The stable hand yanked the spear back, the cord tied to his wrist, then hurled it. Steel slicing through the air with lethal accuracy to its mark. A spear punched clean through Goryu's skull. Blood streamed down his face as he unleashed one final cracked laugh, his mind snapping back to that first impression. He'd sworn Shuji was human. until panic painted him a monster. On his final gasp, he croaked one bitter truth. Shuji was neither man nor monster. He reigned over death itself. Shuji skewered Goryu with a brutal thrust, watched the staff demon's body slam against the cliff face, and plummeted down with it. Plummeting, he lunged, and his fingers closed on the spear's tethering cord, and he lunged, barely snatching it, leaving himself dangling mid-air. His body convulsed as he gnawed his teeth against searing pain, convinced he was a wreck. Pain ripped through his skull as if it had been split wide open. Organs ripped and his legs shattered. He forced himself to cling to one brutal truth. If he didn't die, he could recover. A sinister surge of power exploded around him, the chi of malevolent spirits twisting like smoke into his wounds. He knew in a heartbeat. The blood-stained, cursed demon art. A strain of the supreme demon arts. He slammed his eyes shut as a memory crashed over him. He remembered how Kokofu once snarled that the only reason he could chase revenge without end, even as his body lay shattered, was the supreme demon art's monstrous regenerative power. Shuji realized his life had been spared for that very reason. And in a single split second, he couldn't tell if he should feel grateful. Lightning tore into the cliffside and hammered Goryu dead on, blasting rocks and mud loose in a roaring avalanche. The corpse wrenched itself out of the wall. The ground convulsed, and the triggered landslide ripped loose, thunderously pouring down the slope. Shuji snapped his gaze upward through a rain of collapsing debris and spat. "Ha! Don't screw with me!" The force ripped him free and he hurtled to the ravine's bottom. Mud and shattered stone pelted him, as driving rain turned the collapse into a roaring avalanche. When the dust settled, nearby rubble had swallowed half his body. Razor-voiced spirits whispered and mocked his ruined state, screaming he should die and chanting that he be buried alive. Their voices swelled into a howl, then snapped silent as something cold moved behind them, and every spirit spun to stare at Ji. They lunged, unleashing a spirit-staggering blast straight at Shuji. Shuji crashed onto his back, chest heaving and utterly spent. They locked eyes with the spirit as it growled, and recognition slammed into them. Shuji bellowed its title and name. Gogori, the staff demon. The ghost surged onward, relentless and unstoppable. It snarled and lashed out with a ghostly staff, swinging at him as Shuji fought to stay upright. He ripped through mud and rubble, wrenched himself loose and scrambled upright. He shouted the name again, louder this time, each syllable forging into command as the spirit hurled itself in one final, desperate lunge. Shuji snapped, his voice slicing the air as he barked a command. "Behold Goryu, the staff demon." The strike slammed to a halt, hovering just inches from him. A raw animal shriek ripped from the spirit as its shape frayed and fell apart. A swirl of pale flame and scattered chi snapped inward, ripping into Shuji's body. The spirit dove into him and vanished completely, fusing into his very being. Shuji sneered, spitting the words like venom. A cursed ghost that had soared to the peak of its power wouldn't be tamed in a day. It would take ages to subdue. He insisted absorbing that spirit would be the spark to catapult him from the compression stage into the remain stage. A ragged groan ripped from him as he hauled himself to his feet again and whispered, "It's time to head back." Pain lanced up his leg and he crumpled to the ground, clawing at the injury and spitting a curse, then murmured that after he returned he'd have to heal his body before attempting to open the Renundu meridians. He snatched the string still clinging to his shattered weapon. He snapped his tongue at the spear split clean in two, grumbling that it was useless, not even fit to be a cane. He whipped his head around and his eyes locked onto Goryu lay dead nearby as rain pounded his mangled flesh, and at his side the very staff that had forged his feared name lay abandoned. A startled murmur escaped Shuji as he limped over and snatched it up. After hoisting it, the full heft slammed into his arms. He scoffed that if Goryu had wielded a full spear instead of a mere staff, he would have been the one to die. He stared at the shattered weapon still clutched in his hand. He ground his teeth and vowed to tip his spear to a razor edge. Anything less would leave him as defanged as the fallen demon. Shuji hobbled into town as the midnight rain slammed down around him. Blood carved a thin trail behind him, dripping steady from his injured leg as he leaned hard on a heavy staff. Winds screaming through the streets, and his soaked clothes clinging to his skin. After a few steps, his legs betrayed him. He barreled shoulder first into the slick, wet stone wall. He clicked his tongue in frustration. Even after siphoning the supreme demon's strength into himself, his body stubbornly refused to heal quickly. It hit him like a thunderclap. This was the first time since returning to the past that he'd poured every ounce of himself into a fight. He swallowed the truth and admitted to himself the aftermath had hit him like a freight train. Every raindrop stabbed like a needle into his skin, his staff pressed into his palms like cold iron, and the bag slung over his shoulder threatened to crush him. He figured he'd shut his eyes for a heartbeat. Then his sight smeared and he lurched forward. Adrift in the haze, he heard Koiko's gentle voice pierce the fog. telling him Shuji hid his own reasons and guarded his secrets. As long as he held his ground in the tiger pit section, they were his family. A memory ignited like a spark in his mind. His eyes widened in sudden realization as he whispered, "Ah, family. A home where I can rest easy." A sly smirk curled his lips as that thought hit him. He hauled himself upright again and staggered back into the storm. After a few more steps that stabbed with pain, he murmured under his breath that a place like that did not suit him. Earlier at the Tiger Pit sect, tension crackled through the air. Koiko slumped alone in her room, her pulse pounding through the heavy quiet. She planted herself in the chair in front of her desk. A weary sigh tore from her lips as she pictured the world of... The martial arts world was a savage crucible, devouring the weak and crowning only the fittest. She knew goodness couldn't wear weakness. Only the strong could see their convictions through to the end, unyielding and uncompromising. She forced herself to remember that her father had lived by that rule and hammered it into her bones. Her hand shot to the scroll tucked by her arm. She eased it open, gaze pinned to the writing. A quiet truth hit her. She'd chosen the same path. The scroll unfurled and laid bare an acceptance letter from the Miram Alliance's Daeongcheon Academy. It hit her. The Miram Alliance ran the academy themselves. They handpicked only candidates aged 16 to 18. Forged into blazing prodigies, they would one day seize the helm of the Kang Ho. Koiko exhaled another long, ragged breath and pressed both palms flat against her face. She'd snuck into the entrance exam in secret, and even now the acceptance felt impossible. She planned to graduate from the academy, sharpen her skills with real experience, and use that foundation to elevate her family's standing. But she balled her hand until her knuckles went white. Eyes fixed on the monstrous tuition bill as she wished a single stack of cash could make everything easier. A memory slammed into her mind. The image of, at the banquet, either Google or you leapt to your feet and demanded the money back. She shook her head, steel in her spine, etching into her heart that saving the people of the Tiger Pit sect mattered above everything, and vowed she'd never regret choosing their lives over any pile of gold. She shot up from her chair, ripped open the window beside her, and let the cold wind slam across her face as she exhaled again. She blurted aloud that she should step outside for fresh air, hoping it would ease her. Now Koiko stomped through a relentless downpour, leading her horse by the reins, and muttered she still didn't feel any better. She roared in frustration, "Why is the weather tormenting me too?" The horse beside her began bucking and whipping its head, stoking the fire of her temper. Gritting her teeth, she snapped, "Is Bong the only one having a good time while I'm at my wit's end?" A thunderous thud exploded nearby, tearing through the rain. Koiko's brows knitted into a razor edge as she snapped, "What was that sound?" Then locked eyes with Bong and barked, "We're going to check it out." When they barrel around the corner, her eyes snapped to a dark, spreading pool of blood soaking the ground. A trembling whisper tore from her lips as shock froze her. She couldn't fathom the sheer number unfolding before her. Her breath hitched. Who could have bled that much? Shuji emerged from the deep shadows ahead, inching forward so slowly that only the faint outline of his form cut through the gloom. It only sprang into sight the moment a streak of lightning tore across and lit the street. Koiko recoiled, voice cracking as she demanded, "Are you a person or a ghost?" From the inky dark, Shuji's voice slipped out in a hush, whispering that he was exactly as he appeared. Koei leapt to the conclusion he was a ghost and blurted it out. Shuji's gaze snapped to his own body. Confusion flared for a heartbeat, and he clamped his mouth shut. He spun and strode away, and at the twitch of his reaction, Koiko knew he was alive. She screamed, "Wait!" then dug into her belongings and it slid through the tiny pouch at his feet. She pressed it into his hand, smirked, and said, "It's a wound self. Cheap but useful. Use it if you need it." She confessed she had no clue what had happened to him. She wouldn't recklessly dive into combat, but she couldn't stand by while someone suffered right in front of her. She snapped that if he truly didn't want it, he could just toss it away. For a heartbeat, Shuji's lips curled into a smirk. He crouched, scooped up the pouch, and inspected it without a sound. Silence hung for a beat. Then he yanked the bag tied to his staff and flicked it into a gentle swing. Koiko's eyes snapped wide with alarm. He exploded into a shout, his voice trembling with raw nerves. She demanded to know why he was doing that. Shuji hurled the sack at her feet, and he barked at her, voice flat as steel. "Put it on the horse!" He spun on his heel and strode away once more. She screamed after him again and again, voice breaking as she begged him to stop and explain. Her gaze latched onto the sack for several seconds as a torrent of frantic thoughts surged through her head. The faint metallic tang riding the rain betrayed how huge it was, and terror coiled in her gut as she feared what lurked inside. Fear clenched her like a fist. What if it held a severed head? Duty burned. If it did, she'd have to report it to the authorities. She sank into a cautious crouch, hand trembling as it reached out and her eyes clamped shut. Then she eased the sack open, every muscle coiled, bracing for the horror inside. At last she lifted her gaze. She gasped as disbelief slammed into her like a punch. Inside the tiger pit, the staff demon had seized the stolen sex funds, and her breath snagged as the realization slammed into her. She snapped her head toward where Shuji had gone and his gaze locked onto him the instant he rounded the next corner. Koiko sprinted after him, bellowing, "Wait!" and demanding to know how he had recovered that stolen money. She whipped around the corner, bracing to confront him face to face. Her eyes shot wide as he found nothing there. Only a slick, copper-red puddle of blood lingered, along with, the instant her feet hit the floor, lightning split the sky, blasting the street into white. Koiko stood alone in the rain, her voice shaking as she shoved a whisper into the storm and demanded, What on earth? Who are you?" Shuji hurled himself off the roof, a deliberate leap into the void. He slammed into the ground below, a ragged groan tearing from his throat as he lay motionless for a few heartbeats. He summoned every scrap of strength and pushed himself upright. No sooner had he stood than a presence loomed close by. He snatched his weapon and hurled it into the nearest haystack, eyes razor narrow as he realized someone was out there, and he wondered who would be roaming at this hour. Just as he moved to slip away, a startled voice ripped through the night. Wu Tuyen burst into view, eyes wide with confusion that snapped into recognition, and he cried, "Shuji!" with raw, overflowing relief. Shuji tilted his head as the voice clicked into place. Of course, that man again. Irritation flared and he mentally spat that he wasn't up for Wu Tuyen's antics tonight. Wu Tuyen barreled toward him, voice fizzing with excitement as he shouted, "Shuji! Where have you been all this time?" Shuji clenched his hand into a tight fist, muttering under his breath that the man was insufferable. Before he could finish the thought, Wu Tuyen barreled over and shouted, concern ringing in his voice as he called Shuji his lifesaver and said he'd hunted everywhere, griping that the meat and rice cakes he'd prepared had gone cold. And Shuji clicked his tongue, annoyed that Wu Tuyen had found a fresh way to be irritating. Wu Tuyen's gaze snapped to Shuji's wounds. He tore open his jacket, hands racing over the cuts, then barked, "What happened? Who dared hurt our youngest?" Rage boiled in his voice as he declared, "This is war, no matter who the culprits are." Shuji jerked his hand away and snapped for silence, then ordered Wu Tuyen to go to their master and fetch the herbs he'd mentioned. Wu Tuyen blinked in confusion, stammered his agreement, and Shuji immediately rattled off the ingredients he needed. I slammed Poria into the pot, uncorked dragon's blood, peeled back persimmon calyx, pulverized fenugreek, scattered flaxseed, snapped piper longum, and crowned the brew with longan fruit. Wu Tuyen hurriedly scrawled them down, shouting there were far too many to gather at once, and demanding where he was supposed to find all those ingredients at this hour. Shuji just said, "Go to Shuaika and fetch them." Recognition slammed into Wu Tuyen. His eyes shot wide. He blurted, "Master Shuaika," the leader of the Howling Tiger Escort Bureau, and panic seized him. He exploded at Shuji, roaring, "Have you lost your mind? How could you go to someone of that standing for herbs?" Shuji stayed ice calm and said, firm as steel, "If Wu Tuyen says it's my request, they'll hand over whatever we need." Wu Tuyen clenched his fists until his knuckles went white, muttering that it made no sense and grumbling that he couldn't even bring himself to strike this stubborn man. He spun toward the door, exhaled a weary sigh and declared he'd go anyway, a favor for his lifesaver. He muttered under his breath, scrambling for the words he'd use when he got there. Shuji said plainly, "Say it's from me," and promised they'd understand. Wu Tuyen shot Shuji a hard look, searched his face, and after a beat muttered, "Fine, I'll just say the stablemaster sent me." The instant he vanished around the corner, Shuji ignited his chi and sent it racing like wildfire through his veins. Energy flared to life, and the air went heavy as he gauged his strength. His staff demon rank anchored at the 10th step of the bone carapace, when a massive red door materialized before him, and he fixed a solemn stare on it. He hissed that to pry it open he'd have to pierce his immune meridian and drain his blood. They ripped it out and poured in a spiritual elixir, a perilous ritual teetering on the edge of disaster. A sudden jolt of memory hit him. His acupoints had been fully open when he battled the staff demon, and a quiet doubt crept in. Had he perhaps lost too much blood? He locked onto the nearby lingering spirit, and vowed to swap the final elixir for the staff demon's very soul. Shuji's gaze snapped cold as steel as he locked onto the spirit, and the ghost screamed in terror when he thrust his hand forward. He lunged and snatched the shimmering strand of spiritual essence. The spirit thrashed and screamed as Shuji yanked it toward him. Moments later the resistance crumbled, and the spirit was swallowed whole, every last whisper devoured. Wu Tuyen barreled around the corner, her voice cracking as she screamed Shuji's name. He stepped closer, voice quivering, Shuaika's strange words pounding through his mind. He exploded, demanding to know who Shuji really was. Shuji stood stone still, snatched the sack of ingredients and, cold as ice, told him to shut up. Wu Tuyen stammered, at a loss, then fell silent. Shuji slipped into the adjacent room, and without once glancing back, barked orders. Wu Tuyan, hold the door. Let no one in until I return, and if anything goes wrong, notify Master Gu at once. Wu Tuyen froze in stunned disbelief, a protest choking off in his throat as Shuji slipped inside and vanished. In the dimly lit room, Shuji dropped into meditation, and his mind plunged straight into thoughts of magic. Once someone blasted past the skull meridian and ascended into the dual principles stage, the line between martial cultivation and raw magic blurred until you couldn't tell which fueled their power. A single thought slammed into him. Kokofu, founder of the Spear Demon Path. Was he still hunted by the Martial Alliance and the Sato sect? Or did he still sit atop the Heavenly Demon sect as its martial god general? Chuji's mind raced. Was Kokofu really out there, hunting down disciples like him and Koiko? His mind plunged even farther. His past slammed into him as a single, searing memory. He glimpsed himself striding alone across a ravaged battlefield. In that vision, he planted his feet on the exact spot where his master had once stood. The massive crimson door loomed before him once more. His fingers hovered on the latch, ready to pry it open. Then a familiar voice rang out. Koiko hovered behind him, voice cracking as she pleaded, "Are you really leaving?" He hurled a potato straight at Shuji. He snatched it from the air without breaking a sweat. Koiko let a fragile smile ghost across her lips, called out, "Farewell, brother," as the enormous door groaned open. Shuji returned a faint smile and whispered that his brother should stay well. A blinding light swallowed him, the memory slipped away, and he jolted awake on the hay where he'd been resting. He let out a long, shuddering breath, muttered to himself, and waited with clenched teeth. Had his attempt succeeded? He shot upright, eyes slamming to the doorway, sneering that the lazy fool must have kept watch outside. He flung the door open and found Wu Tuyen slumped on the floor. The door nudged his head and he snapped awake. A rotting stench latched onto Shuji like a curse. Wu Tuyen stumbled back, shouting with raw alarm. She darted forward, cried, "Shuji, are you all right?" Then gagged as a putrid stench seeped out of the room. As Shuji strode into the night, falling leaves whispered through the silence, and he plunged inward once again. He'd reached Li Yun's top tier, the ultimate perfected stage recognized by all martial families, preparation finished, and his next target looming. He shot skyward and touched down featherlight on the drifting leaves. As he rocketed skyward, dark cheese coiled around him. Ethereal wings erupted from his back. Staring down at the town, his eyes hardened, and he murmured that after the Jiao clan head, his next revenge would fall on the Black Dao sect, the defeated faction of Anhui, and one of the pinnacles of the 5 great families. And as his chi flared and the night air trembled, he breathed the final name under his breath, Nam Geng clan. Deep inside the Tiger Pit sect, Ko Genin planted himself with his wife, Shagian, sharing a single hushed drink as the night held its breath. He blurted that the Namgung family had sent an invitation, and moved their grand banquet up that year. And Shajian snapped. Why would they, of all people, be invited to a gathering dominated by Anhui's great orthodox sects? Ko Genin dropped the bomb. The Zhou family, the official representatives of Gor Hyun, had vanished, and their sect was being tapped to fill the void. Shajian refilled another cup and muttered that they were innocent, bracing for frosty looks and cold shoulders from everyone else. Koganen agreed, his voice cold as iron, warning that in the martial world only power's logic rules, weakness summons suffering no matter how fair, and against the Namgung family's towering presence, they were mere pebbles at a mountain's base. Shagian stopped him with a calm hand, told him not to stew, then tossed out the news. Namgung Yul, the family's precious daughter who'd enrolled at Gyeongchun Academy, was coming home. Ko Genin's eyes blazed. "Ah, you mean the sword blossom, Lady Namgung Yul?" Shagian confirmed it, noting whispers in the wives' circles that the banquet was a stage to parade their daughter, unveil her to the world, flaunt her, and declare her ready for marriage alliances. Koganen tossed his head back and slammed a laugh into his cup. "Ha ha 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 ha. I'd be happy if that were the case. I can listen to a man brag about his daughter all day long." He set the cup down with a sharp clack, his voice turning to steel as he declared his own Koiko was in no way inferior to Lady Namgung. Shagian blinked. "Honey, why would you say that?" Ko Genin answered simply. He swore it was the truth. Koiko had every beauty, every talent, every virtue, but the one thing she lacked, he admitted with quiet bitterness. He sighed, admitting he hadn't been a worthy parent. Shame boiled in him as a father, and he knew he had to push her forward before it was too late. Just as he chugged the last of his drink, A booming shout blasted from the doorway. "Dad! Mom!" Koiko slammed into the room, lungs burning, and tore toward them, screaming, "No! Father! Mother!" Koganen's grin burst wide as he cried, "My daughter! Hearing you call me Dad again is the best thing." She brushed his joy aside. He unfurled the scroll, thrust it at them, and roared that it was urgent, demanding their immediate attention. The instant Koganen's gaze slammed into the document, his hands burst into tremors. "What is this?" "The acceptance letter to the Dyeongchun Academy." Shigeon clapped a hand to her mouth, stunned, speechless. "Look at this. Perfect scores across every subject. Our daughter is the top student, the top student." Koganen shot to his feet, flung the window wide, and bellowed it to the street. "This calls for a celebration. Let's hold a grand banquet." Koiko snapped him dead in his tracks. Tuition was at stake. Her parents exploded together, insisting she had nothing to fear. Her father vowed he'd raise the money, even if he had to sell the sect's very pillars. And Shajian, eyes blazing, demanded Koiko devote herself entirely to her studies. Koiko shook her head, spun, and hauled a heavy sack forward. She let it fall and it burst open, its contents tumbling free. Her father inhaled sharply, disbelief ripping through him. "My brain shorted. This is—" She planted her feet, head high, and roared that they had nothing to fear. She'd recovered every last coin they needed. Days blurred by. Beside a quiet riverside, Shuji and Koiko stood together again. She sheltered in the tree's cool shade while he kept a smoldering coil of mosquito repellent burning a few paces away. She held him in her gaze, a long, silent beat, and a strange certainty bloomed. Impossibly, things had begun getting better the moment Shuji walked in. She sauntered over, voice a silk-soft dare, my pocket-sized lucky charm. She leaned in, voice razor-bright. "I haven't seen you much lately. Where have you been wandering off to? Huh? Did something change since I saw you a few days ago?" Shuji goes stone silent, eyes vacant, as if her words never registered. She slammed her palm into his back and snapped, "What are you thinking so hard about?" She slammed down beside him and jabbed the button again. Why hadn't he answered when she called? She stepped in right beside him and stunned Shuji, who blurted a vague this and that, while beneath the surface, he was plotting to dismantle the Namong family. A memory slammed back, his own voice from years ago, recounting how an elder of the Namong family had cut a shadow deal with the Zhou family and the Black Path sect to bury the Tiger Pit sect's savage persecution. The Namong family. They hoarded power, cloaked the conspirators, and let injustice fester until it ate everything from the inside. The truth slammed into him. The Namong family were a sovereign powerhouse inside Anhui, handed autonomous rule, and charged with enforcing order across every sect and clan. A corrosive rot ate through their ranks from within. Some factions sold their conscience, watching lesser groups run riot and commit unspeakable atrocities. He pocketed bribes and bought their silence. One of those elders' names blazed across Koiko's kill list. One of his many betrayers plunged a blade into him, in the life he once called his own. The thought hit, and his eyes snapped into razor slits on instinct. Koiko leaned in at his side and whispered again, soft and insistent. Were the other children still bothering him? Shuji started to deny it, but she tore into his protest, declaring mere warnings wouldn't be enough. There was no avoiding it. She flashed a daring smile, locked eyes with him and breathed. "Shuji, do you want to leave with me?" She pressed on. This time she'd been accepted into Dyeongchun Academy. Her words crashed into a ghost from his past. Hu Ye-yang's own lament, and marked her as the top student. But I couldn't go because I had no money. And if I had been accepted there, my life would have been completely different. Koiko's voice softened into a warm, unwavering vow. "I'll enroll at Dyeongchun Academy to broaden my horizons, forge new connections, return, and make our family grow." She leaned in, voice a low, intimate whisper as she beckoned. "Shuji, you're quiet, diligent, and talented. If you're willing, come with me to Dyeongchun Academy. Life there will be far more comfortable than here." Shuji's lips flickered into a whisper of a smile, so faint it barely registered. He realized, cold as a blade, this was the dream fate had stolen from her in her past life. Once the dust settled, she wouldn't need him anymore. From then on, she'd walk that path alone. Koiko leaned in and demanded, "You're coming with me, right?" At last Shuji answered, hesitant, not certain, saying he'd go only if the situation allowed. She stepped back, folded her arms, and shot him a teasing grin. "What? Playing hard to get?" she declared. "Then I'll take that as a yes, for now." Warned him Dyeongchun Academy lay far away. Told him to settle debts, square obligations, and say his farewells now. Then snapped, You don't owe anyone money, do you? Shuji kept his head bowed, raking the coals with steady hands, and murmured that he had debts to collect. Koiko's eyes shot open. Debts? You have debts? She snapped, clamping his arm as protective fire laced her voice. You deal with them. Collect everything you're owed. Got it? She didn't wait for a reply. She spun away, strode to her horse, and flung over her shoulder. No! Let's go! I'll collect them all for you. Shuji rose slowly, watching her retreating figure. He murmured to himself, his voice a thread-thin whisper that never rose, no matter what. That must be collected, he snapped, and his face hardened into shadow. A chilling grin split his face as he leaned in and whispered, every last coin, every last drop of blood. All of it. A few days raced by. The Namong family estate erupted into a roar as guests poured through the gates for the grand banquet. At the entrance, Shuika sank into a deep, formal bow as the Tiger Pit sect appeared, greeting them respectfully and noting their long journey. Koiko mirrored the bow and insisted the escort had worked hard too, and Kojinan voiced his thanks, praising the escort for a comfortable trip before motioning them into the estate. The Tiger Pit sect's stable boys stood open-mouthed as the Namong family's staggering estate unfolded. Marble walkways, ornate pillars, and sprawling gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Wu Tuyan's eyes bulged with awe as he muttered, so this is the Namong family. Massive, breathtaking. Everyone is jaw-droppingly handsome, and, in an instant, it bloomed into breathtaking beauty. Raucous, ecstatic shouts from the young women seized their attention. Several girls surged forward, swarming Shuji and pelting him with questions. Where he'd come from, whether he worked alone, how old he was. They gushed over his handsome face, ogled his strong arms, even offered to wipe the sweat from his skin, and irritation flared in Shuji. From a distance the stable boys watched, envy coiling in their guts as bitterness flared. They muttered he was mean and branded him a jerk, until one cut through the whispers and snapped, we agreed to be nice to Shuji. Wu Tuyan let out a helpless groan and confessed he couldn't help himself. Shuji finally caught their stares. A boy panicked, jabbed a finger and blurted he'd seen them, and in an instant, Shuji melted away from the crowd of girls. He snapped into view, right in front of the stable boys. He pressed a steady hand to Wu Tuyan's shoulder and whispered, I'm leaving the rest to you. Wu Tuyan blinked, bewilderment flaring, and yelled after him. Shuji had already vanished again. Disappointment hardened into icy glares as the girls snapped, where did that handsome boy go? And scrambled to salvage the situation. Wu Tuyan hoisted them up, jabbed a clumsy finger at his chest, and tried to sound charming. But his voice cracked. They towered over him, sneers blazing, pure unmasked disgust burning in their eyes. And he stormed off, sneering and ripping the whole encounter to shreds the moment they left. Wu Tuyan stood rooted, eyes fixed on the ground, a lone tear carving his cheek as he breathed Shuji's name and hissed, jerk! Late that afternoon, the stables erupted, thundering hooves and steaming breaths filling the air. Shuji perched on the carriage roof as a harsh overseer barked orders, tearing into the stable boys and snapping that the banquet was about to begin, sneering, lazy bums. He swung the stick viciously, pummeling one of them over and over as he sneered, have you lost your mind, boy? He snarled about the meat's price and sneered that the boy was worthless. The boy curled into a tight ball and screamed for help. After spitting on him, the overseer barked that he was swamped, and then he slammed his boot into Able Boy's head, barked at the new stable boy to ready the sacrifice for the blood oath, and demanded if it had been handled properly. The boy bowed, said he'd brought the offering in whole with its blood untouched as instructed, then trembled and confessed there was a problem. The overseer's face twisted into a furious snarl as he barked, what problem could possibly exist? The stable boy panted, explaining the wolf they'd captured was colossal, so heavy they could barely budge it. The overseer lashed his stick again, roaring they should have grabbed anyone within reach to help. Terrified, the boy bolted to call the others. The overseer clicked his tongue like a judge slamming a gavel, then muttered, they're useless. His eyes snapped to a flicker of movement inside one of the carriages. The shroud twitched, and they dared to believe the sacrifice still drew breath. He snatched his sword, snarled that the stable boys hadn't even checked if the animal was dead, and swore he'd sever one of their legs when they returned. He hoisted himself into the carriage, snarling that those nagging tasks had stolen every ounce of joy from the banquet. Inside, he tore through the room, bellowing, where are you hiding, wolf? He dropped to his knees and patted its head, scoffing that it was nothing but a wolf cub, and baffled by the chaos it had sparked. The wolf stirred. The overseer recoiled, stumbling back as a choked gasp ripped into a shout when he saw its colossal size. He exploded into hysterical laughter. He practically bounced with the discovery, shouting that a wolf this massive would turn the blood oath into a roaring triumph, and crowing that, for once, the incompetent workers had accidentally struck gold as he pictured the family head beaming with pride. He didn't suspect a thing as a rope slithered up behind him and silently coiled around his neck. Lurking in the shadows, Shuji snapped the rope taut and yanked the man skyward. The overseer flailed, clawing at the air and choking out desperate pleas for help. Shuji's voice was ice cold as he stepped out from behind a hanging slab of meat and admitted he was curious about the Namong family's inner workings. He fought back, teeth clenched, forcing ragged words past the crushing grip choking his throat. Shuji grinned into the shadows, yanked harder, and hissed that he didn't need him to say a word. His legs gave out. He went utterly limp and crumpled to the ground. Moments later, the man's spirit tore free and hovered beside the corpse. Shuji dropped the rope and snatched the spirit by the head. He glared down at the fallen body, voice cold and unyielding. A dead man is more honest than any living soul. Outside the carriage, booming voices ricocheted through the air. Namong stableboys seized Tiger Pit hands and dragged them across the yard, shouting for their help as Wu Tuyen thrashed against the grip and bellowed, "We're not Namong, we're the Tiger Pit!" The Namong stableboy dropped to his knees, pleading and swearing he'd hand over meat and food later if they'd help him haul a single wolf. Wu Tuyen shoved him off, bristling at the demand, and the Namong boy scanned the crowd, calling out, "Where's that warrior gone?" He slammed into another Namong stableboy, who snapped at him for standing around. Panic boiled up and he blurted a hurried yes. A heartbeat later, several of them locked arms and heaved the enormous wolf, dangling upside down from a thick pole, off its perch, shouted a count in unison, then staggered forward under its weight. Wu Tuyen exploded, roaring why they were forcing him into this, as the Namong stableboy thanked him again and promised a reward. Wu Tuyen snapped that he better keep his word, and demanded why the wolf felt so heavy. Had it just given birth? The Namong boy, trembling, stammered an offer of 4 servings of meat, and Wu Tuyen bellowed his agreement. The grand banquet roared to life. Servants darted between tables, arms piled high with steaming delicacies, sliding each plate to the gathered guests. Perched on the balcony of the Namong estate's highest building, 2 shadowed figures fixed their gaze on the scene unfolding below. Rocking lazily in his chair, the elderly Sword King Namong Cheon, the former head of the Namong family, watched the chaos with a bored smirk and flatly said, "I'm bored." Beside him, Namong Pa, the Namong family's current head, leaned in and told his father Anhui still seethed after the Zhou family's annihilation, arguing the Sword King's appearance would restore order. Namong Cheon snapped he'd heard that argument before, but Namong Pa pressed on. The truth hit. The Zhou family were an undeniable collateral branch of the Namong line, led by Zhou Yangjia, a distant relative of Namong Pengseng, who still commanded respect on the Council of Elders. The Sword King snapped that he already knew. He'd seen Zhou Yangjia's face several times and the boy had been astonishingly bright. Namong Pa pressed on, declaring that now the truth of Zhou Yangjia's collusion with the Black Path had leaked out. The Namong clan had to prove they, as a pillar of the righteous path, bore no shame. Namong Cheon scoffed, brushing off the alarm. Let a few weaklings die among themselves. His son always melts down over the smallest things. Namong Pa groaned and railed that likening the Zhou family and the Black Path sect to crickets was ridiculous. The incident he referenced had happened long ago. Namgang Yul burst in and cut their exchange off. The eldest daughter of the Namong family swept in, dropped into a crisp bow, and declared it was almost time to enter the banquet hall. Namong Pa's face lit up as he gushed over his daughter and asked his father if she'd grown into a beauty, while the Sword King smiled and teased whether she'd spotted any worthy husband material at the academy. Namong Pa lunged forward, disbelief burning, bellowing into his father's ear that she was far too young to be worrying about marriage, while Namong Cheon flicked a dismissive hand and complained about the racket. Namong Yul declared, calm as ice, that her grandfather was right. She had to marry soon and become an asset to the family. Namong Pa faltered, and admitted that even the idea of marriage felt far too early. Panic twisted his face and he snapped, "Are you secretly seeing someone?" She snapped a flat denial. Namong Yul warned that after graduation the situation could flip, insisting she was only getting a head start. Her grandfather roared that she must search farther for a groom and never settle for those bland, dull-witted boys next door. Namong Pa shot back he'd be the one to pick her husband. Namong Cheon sneered their son would only snag another dull nobody, and Namong Pa lunged to change the subject, warning their daughter the blood oath ceremony was right around the corner. She nodded sharply as he ripped through the ritual, laying out every precise bone-chilling step. He thundered that the blood of a colossal, ferocious beast would be drained straight into a copper tray, and then the cup swept around, each would-be ally draining it to forge an alliance. He settled a heavy hand on his daughter's shoulder, and proclaimed she would wield the family's sacred sword to draw the blood, the ceremony's most vital role, and Namgung Yul swore she'd do her utmost to elevate the family's prestige. Namgung Pa barked, "To the banquet now!" and snapped at his father to rise. His gaze dropped. He locked onto someone below and hissed through clenched teeth. He dropped into a sharp bow to his father, excused himself, and declared he'd go on ahead. He halted at the doorway, spun to his daughter, eyes blazing, and warned her in a thunderous voice that she wouldn't let anyone wrench the sword from her grasp. Confusion slammed into Namgung Yul. She stared at her sacred weapon and murmured, "Why would that ever happen?" Down on the banquet level, the Tiger Pit's raucous arrival ripped through the crowd and seized every gaze. A guest shot a look back and whispered, "They must have been invited this time, not the Zhou family." He'd been dead certain the Tiger Pit sect had wiped out the Zhou family at the Black Path sect. Then he saw the Zhou family standing here, and that certainty shattered. A man nearby slammed him, demanding he speak sense and snarling that the Tiger Pit sect had no money, no power, and couldn't possibly have destroyed the Zhou family or the Black Path sect. They erupted into cruel laughter. The moment their mockery hit him, Kogunan balled his hands into white-knuckled fists, fury burning across his face. Koiko's eyes locked on her father's face, panic flaring as she slipped a hushed, worried whisper under her breath. A merry voice burst from behind, demanding why everyone looked so grim, and Kogyanan and Koiko spun around to find The elderly man stroked his long beard with a grin and taunted, "Not happy with the pledge's terms?" insisting he'd sweated over every clause. Guests around the hall wore brittle smiles, fawning over him and breathing easy under Namgung's protection. He was Namgung Peng Sang, elder of the Namgung family's fire palace. He forged a pledge. Every righteous organization that gathered would be folded into the Namgung family. The Namgung would dole out pieces of their secret arts, and each group would hand over protection fees every quarter. They smiled for show while behind clenched teeth, they spat that he was a cunning, greedy old fox. Then one guest thundered that it was a staggering honor to be chosen to learn the Namgung family's secret arts, laughing at his own words. Peng Sang's smirk widened with approval as he spun toward the Tiger Pit sect and quipped, "So, this is the rumored Tiger Pit sect leader?" Kogyanan and his daughter dropped into a crisp, respectful bow, and Kogyanan proclaimed that meeting him was an honor. Peng Sang chuckled, planted a heavy palm on Koganan's shoulder and insisted, "No honor. We'll be running into each other a lot," called the Zhou family's incident unfortunate, then tightened his grip. Spiritual energy flared from him as he sneered, insisting he hadn't accused him and declaring he'd invited them precisely because he trusted them. A wicked grin split his face as he crowed the blood oath would be a windfall for the Tiger Pit sect. He tightened his grip and snarled that once they mastered the Namgung family's secret sword arts, the sect would explode in power, easily pay protection fees and still turn a profit. His gaze snapped to Koiko, and with a cold sneer, he taunted that now her arranged marriage had collapsed, she'd be better off as the concubine of some powerful older man. Those matches were all the rage with young people lately, he scoffed, and far better than being the official wife of an incompetent boy. He thrust his hand toward her chest. His hand lunged for her chest, snapping forward, then froze just inches away before it could touch her. A stern voice rips the silence in two. "What are you doing over there?" Namgung Pa materialized and flared his spiritual energy, instantly shredding Peng Seng's suppressed power. Peng Seng stumbled back, eyes wide, and addressed him with rigid formality. Inside, he clicked his tongue and seethed that the family head was a maddening killjoy. Aloud, he played it off as nothing, only a quick exchange after spotting a familiar face. Namgung Pa loomed over him, gaze like ice, insisting he alone would judge its importance and snapping, again, for the truth. What happened? Pang Sang erupted into manic laughter in response, while the family head paced like a coiled spring, every nerve taut as the big event loomed. He bellowed that the girl had questions about the pledge, and that he was merely offering advice, then looked to Koyanan and asked him to confirm. Kojinin crumpled into a bow and, voice cracking, stammered, "It's true." Peng flashed a calm grin, reassured Namgung Pa everything was harmless, then bowed politely and slipped away. As he darted past Kojen, he leaned close and murmured they'd pick up the conversation they'd been denied today, later. When he finally strode away, Namgung Pa released a long, ragged breath as relief washed over him. He slammed a hand to his chest, voice breaking, and apologized with raw sincerity for the elder's rudeness. Kojenan tried to brush off the apology, but Namgung Pa pushed back hard, insisting they must become fierce allies and that decency demanded it. He whirled to face Koiko and dropped into a low, reverent bow. They tore through the silence, apologizing for the elder's inappropriate remarks. She answered his bow with a crisp, respectful dip and declared, I'm fine. Namgung Pa sized up Koiko in cold silence, his gaze razor-sharp. Remembering she'd stormed to first place on Dengchunan Academy's entrance exam, respect flared in him. Her foundations were rock solid, and she could become both a fierce rival and a true friend to his daughter. He barked a quick, "Thanks," and snapped his gaze up to gauge the hour. Right on cue, Namgung Yul materialized behind him and announced herself, and Namgung Pa introduced her to Koiko, urging them to greet one another. They bowed deeply, then traded names in low, respectful tones. A cold clarity hit Namgung Yul. This was the girl who'd grabbed first place in the exam. Koiko's gaze snapped narrow as she recognized him as the Swordflower. Namgung Pa leaned in, voice tight. "Are the preparations complete?" His daughter met his stare and said, "They're ready." His gaze snapped to the massive wolf. Tied above, he roared that at last the moment had arrived, then bellowed aloud, "Now! At last! Brace yourselves! The blood oath begins now." Later that night, as darkness swallowed the estate, Namgung Pa ascended the stairs to the platform where the wolf was tied. He skidded to a halt halfway up, spun to face the gathered guests, and addressed them with a— His voice thundered across the entire courtyard as he poured out heartfelt thanks to every heroic comrade from Anhui province who'd gathered for this occasion. Several guests froze, their voices snuffed out as his chi detonated in a savage display of power. Namgung Pa thundered, reminding the gathered they'd taken up swords for justice and balance, then drove home the brutal truth. Apostles were razing the north, barbarians pressed from the east, and a demonic cult ran rampant in the west. As the Marine Alliance, charged with stopping these threats, withered day by day, he thundered a declaration. They swore the oath, fused into one, and vowed to guard the age-old justice and balance their ancestors had defended for generations. The guests exploded into a deafening roar, chanting the Namgung clan's name again and again. The Namgung warriors slammed the taiko, each blow erupting like a thunderclap that shook the ground. A bell's toll ripped through the night, announcing the start of the blood oath ceremony. Namgung Yul climbed the stairs, each step slow and deliberate, as drum beats thundered through the area. She hit the halfway point and came face to face with her father. He shot a single command, "Proceed," and she nodded. Then he exploded forward, vaulting onto the top platform. She snatched up the sword, fingers locking around the hilt. She shut her eyes, slowly slid Namgung's blade free, and silently vowed that Namgung's sword was hers. She whipped it through the air, a silent oath blazing in her chest. Today, here, she'd pour out every ounce of herself to crown Namgung's name with glory. Her eyes snapped open and she launched into a blinding storm of razor-precise, intricate swordplay. She moved with surgical precision, each motion a study in pure, breathtaking grace. She finished the forms, froze, and stood stone still. Now only the ceremony's final act remained. She leveled her sword at the wolf, tied fast in the platform's center. She steeled herself and hurled every last ounce of her being into this final act. She rocketed forward, unleashing the peerless sword of the vast sky technique, the heavenly dance, single line. Just as her sword's tip hovered inches from the wolf's neck, the supposedly dead creature twitched. Blood-soaked, he ripped a grin from deep inside him, and suddenly a hand shot out from inside the wolf. As Namgung Yul's blade descended for her throat, a topless, bloodied man wearing a wolf headdress lunged, his hand clawing toward her. His hand hovered a heartbeat from her skin when she snapped her gaze to him. A memory slammed into her. Her father's voice thundered, "Yul, the sword! You can't let anyone take it!" He clamped his hand around her neck and hoisted her into the air. Namgung Yul froze, shock and confusion shredding her calm as her thoughts sprinted. Someone had just crawled out of a wolf's stomach? No way. Was she dreaming? Tears burst from her as she fought to accept the impossible. The choke was real, ripping air from her lungs. And the holy sword, where was it? She snapped her gaze forward at a sword suspended in midair, teetering seconds from crashing down, cold steel pressed to her throat. She let out a low groan, eyes locked on the blade biting her skin. Shuji's voice cut like a blade. "I'm pressing your pressure points now. Struggle and I'll cut off your ear first." Everything slammed into Yul's mind, and she erupted into a raw, piercing scream. Her father barreled down the stairs. He snapped his head back at the sound as warriors below erupted in questions. Some insisted they'd seen a person emerge from the wolf, while others scoffed it was just guts spilling out. Then Namgung Pa flared his chi and surged upward. He felt Yul's energy splinter like glass and his chest tightened. What had happened upstairs? Then his daughter's sword sheath clattered down the stairs. His heart lurched and his eyes snapped to it. He knew instantly it was the holy sword's sheath. A thunderous voice erupted from the platform above. "Listen up, you bastards of the Namgung clan!" Namgung Pa's head snapped up. He saw his daughter held hostage, and he screamed her name, horror ripping through him. He spat "murderous bastard" at Shuji, and thundered for him to release his daughter this instant. Shuji's voice sliced through the silence. I have 2 demands. Namgung Pa barreled in, roaring that the fiend must release his daughter. Then, out of nowhere, someone slid up beside him and snapped, Quiet for a moment, I can't hear what Shuji's saying. Namgung Pa roared at his father. But Namgung Cheon stayed ice-cold, urging him not to lunge in blindly, and reminding him that even after inheriting the family headship, he still hadn't shaken that reckless habit. If Suji had meant to kill her, he would have leapt into action the instant he could. He's up there because he's after something. Shuji's smirk flared as he praised the old man's crafty genius, and Namgung Cheon bowed, a grateful thank you on his lips. Shuji leaned in, locked eyes with Yule, and snarled that if anyone dared interrupt him again, he'd snap the girl's neck first. Namgung Pa ground his teeth, rage flaring as he leveled a dagger-like glare up at Shuji. Shuji cut back in, voice sharp. Like I said, I have 2 demands. First, cancel today's blood oath. It's blatantly unfair. The Namgung clan stood unshakable, the great pillar of the righteous faction. They're selling out to a filthy, crooked pact. That's why the great cause can't stand. Next, the one who forged this treaty must be killed. Drag them to this altar and I'll free the girl without a single scratch. Namgung Pa snapped his hand up, eyes pleading for permission to speak. Shuji shot him a quick, decisive nod. Namgung Pa's voice cut through the room. The treaty will be revised fairly, but murdering the man who forged it is unforgivable. Shuji flashed a grin, cut him off mid-sentence, and snapped that before Namgung Pa stamped it, unacceptable. He should ask Shuji what he thinks first. Down below, Namgung Pengsang strode forward and roared at Suji. She spat, "Fiend!" then hissed, "Do you really think the Namgung clan will fall for your cunning silver tongue?" Shuji's reply froze the air. "If Pengsang steps up, I release the woman unharmed." Pengsang roared back, branding Shuji a crazed bastard and accusing him of engineering a hostage swap to seal away his martial arts, flat out declaring the scheme nonsense. Shuji blurted, stunned, "When did I ever say you had to seal your martial arts?" Peng reeled, snapping, "What did you just say?" Shuji snarled, "I don't need to seal my martial arts, I'll beat him to death." He barked at Pengsang to quit the nonsense and haul himself up, sneering, "Snake eyes." The instant Shuji spoke, Pengsang snapped to face Namgung Pa and bellowed he'd go. He'd climb up and save Yule. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some couldn't believe the elder would dare such a gamble, while others snarled that his niece's life hung by a thread, forcing his hand even as the outcome stayed painfully uncertain. Namgung Pa's fist clenched, thoughts ricocheting as he vowed not to fall for the fiend's trick, but Yule's peril bore down on him. And if Peng, the lifelong elder, began to sing and intervene, the odds might flip and force his hand. He snapped to Pengsang and spat a single measured command. "All right, go up." Pengsang stood frozen, stammering, then panic detonated in his mind. He swallowed a curse, stunned the clan head had agreed so readily. Shuji had to have hatched a scheme, and storming up unprepared would be stepping straight into his snare. Murmurs rolled through the crowd, awed by the clan's devotion and pity boiling for the man destined to face a Namlung elder. Pengsang seethed in silent fury, convinced none of them sensed the icy dread knotting his chest. Then a thunderous voice ripped through the air. Heng spat, "You lazy bastard." He whipped around to find Namgung Cheon perched atop a taiko drum, snapping impatiently for him to hurry. Pengsang lunged forward, his shout raw with fierce obedience. "Yes, Grand Clan Head, I'm going up right now!" Cheon exploded into uproarious laughter, bellowing that he hadn't had this much fun in ages. Pengsang thundered up the stairs, fury and scorching humiliation churning in his chest. "Damn it! Damn it!" He refused to be puppeted by some nameless upstart. Now that things had come this far, he'd rather. He crested the platform's summit, and still no resolution had formed. His eyes zeroed in on Shuji, cloaked in a rough animal hide. The youth's immaturity blazed obvious. If he wasn't a rejuvenated master, Pengsang swore he'd end him with his own hands. At that instant, Shujing's eyes slit as he locked onto the man who had once sat atop his kill list. The one shielded by kinship to Zhou Yangjia who swept the Hojiang sect massacre under the rug without a single inquiry, hunted Koiko to the brink of death to snuff out future threats, and after Shuji eradicated the 5 Venoms and the Hong Kong remnants, launched a ruthless smear campaign to brand Shuji a public enemy of the Muram. Shuji slammed his hand down and spat. "The slaughterhouse butchers told me Pengsang ordered the wolves captured. Is that true?" Pengsang confirmed it without a second thought. Shuji snapped, "Why drag the cub along with the mother? One would have been enough." Pengsang's voice turned to ice as he demanded dangerous breeds be wiped out completely. Any survivors would only become vengeful beasts. Shuji lowered his head and murmured, "I knew it." His thoughts darkened. Peng Sang's cruelty and iron resolve burned unchanged through every lifetime. Past and present couldn't share the same sky. Shuji eased his sword down beside the wolf, cradling Yule in his right arm, leaned close and whispered an apology to the wounded beast, then swore, "I'll drag that old snake straight down into hell." In a heartbeat, he yanked his fingers off the pressure point at the base of Yule's neck. He clamped his hand on her jaw, then let her speak, rage shaking her voice as she denounced him. A villain who dared to act so brazenly within the Namong stronghold, convinced he'd walk away unscathed. Leaning close to her face, Shuji cut in, "I can," and she cried out in disbelief. "What?" His mouth claimed hers in a slow, full, deliberate kiss. Gasps of disbelief exploded from the crowd below. The instant he ripped himself free, a guttural groan ripped from Yule. Then it detonated into a raw, soul-shredding scream as pain consumed him. He swiped at his lips, then intoned, "You're noisy." Namgung Pa erupted in outrage, roaring, "What are you doing? This wasn't part of the deal!" Shuji clamped a hand on Yule's shoulder and spat that he hadn't hurt her, only poisoned her, so he'd kept his word. Then, before she could scream, he snatched her and flung her off the platform. Namgung Pa shrieked, "Yule!" He exploded forward, snatching her out of the air as his hands raced over her body. A black dread crashed over him, her inner energy shattered and warped by a poison he couldn't even name. Who was this fiend? He roared for a healer, and one warrior snapped to the order while the rest tensed, primed to seize Shuji. Shuji snapped his hand up, a tiny vial flashing in his grip. He roared that this was the antidote and dared anyone else to set foot on the altar. If Peng Sang tried to flee, he'd smash it to smithereens in an instant. The warriors gnashed their teeth, one spat, "Despicable!" Shuji plunged his hand into the wolf's flank and wrenched his staff free. Peng Sang's eyes snapped open. His eyes snapped to it. He knew it in an instant and barked. What connection did Shuji have to the Unorthodox Alliance's money-collecting demon? Whirling the staff high overhead, Shuji snapped, "You don't need to know." Peng Song braced like a coiled spring, his mind snapping, "This madman!" As the staff came crashing down out of nowhere, he vaulted back at the last second, and the truth slammed into him like a lightning strike. "You meant to annihilate the altar with a single strike. That's it. Now I get it. It was you." He seized a nearby sword and thundered Shuji's name as the killer who annihilated the Zhou family and raised the Black Path sect, the infamous three-tiered abyss. The blade lashed at Shuji, skimming the youth's shoulder. Fuji's staff clattered from his hands. He whipped out twin short blades and lunged forward. Peng Sang slammed his forearm up to parry the first strike, blood blooming instantly. He slashed his sword in a brutal horizontal arc, a pained groan ripping from him. Shuji backed away just enough to scatter iron caltrops and vanished. He reappeared behind Peng Seng, hammer cocked. Peng Seng snarled, "Damn it! This rat-like guy!" He felt the blow a split second before and dove under it. He snapped back, aiming straight for my back. Posed like it was brilliant, but it screamed obvious. And in that blink of arrogance his foot slammed right into the caltrops. His face convulsed as white-hot agony ripped through his legs. A scream ripped out as Shuji snapped his staff back, the cord tethered to his wrist whipping tight, and he barked, "Do it properly! Don't you need the antidote?" Peng Seng shot his gaze up. Pain drowned as fury flared, and he roared, "You coward! Using such cheap tricks instead of fighting fair." Shuji snatched his staff, heaved it across his shoulders and froze, cowardice blazing as he refused to fight fair. Then the world stilled, and he tossed out two final words. "So what?" The altar crumbled beneath their feet. A lone warrior bellowed a frantic warning. The structure was collapsing. He bent every warrior of the Namlung noble family to his will, to throw himself between danger and the clan head and his household. Someone lunged at Namgung Cheon to intervene, but the grand clan head waved him off, eyes locked on the chaos above as he mused aloud. So this brat, barely a kid, actually commands the three-tiered abyss. A feral grin split his face as he thought, "That bastard! This is so much fun!" Back on the crumbling platform, Peng Seng ripped the caltrops from his feet, hauled himself upright, and jeered, calling them nothing but petty tricks. He clenched his sword until his knuckles went white and roared at Shuji, accusing him of looking down on a man who'd been an elder his whole life. That arrogant brat leveled his blade, jabbed a hateful label at him, and let contempt boil through every word. A blistering wave of chi rocketed at Shuji, who stood stone still and shot back a single calm line. "I told you before," then hurled more iron caltrops into the air and snarled that I'm more than enough to beat you down. He cracked his staff through the air, launching a deadly volley of projectiles straight at Peng Seng. He parried wildly as his head spun. "This is driving me crazy." His martial arts run deep, but his combat style is rough, and Shuji unleashed his chi. Peng Song forced every muscle against the onslaught, his mind reeling. Where did a man like this spring from, and why does he hate me so fiercely? No, More urgently, I must finish him now or he'll finish me. He plunged into the sword technique, unleashing the limitless flow of the sky. Shuji launched into a lightning-fast sidelong roll, slipping clean out of its path. Ping Seng's smirk sharpened into a sneer as he barked, "Lazy donkey rolls?" He hurled himself forward, roaring that it was the move every martial artist avoids. He'd already predicted Shuji would try it, and his blade found its mark. A blade sliced into Shuji's shoulder, crimson spilling as he slammed his right hand over the wound. He snatched it, then let it go a heartbeat later. The bloodied hand hurtled toward Peng Seng in a savage, sweeping arc. The spoon that sprays crimson. Blood splattered across Peng Seng's face, some slipping into his mouth as he burst into maniacal laughter. "Ha ha! Just get torn apart and die." In a heartbeat, his face contorted with horror, and he clamped a hand over his mouth. They shrieked, voice ripping the air. What is this? Poison?" He collapsed to the ground, convulsing and howling in agony. The warrior went rigid and snapped. "Was that the elder's voice? The smoke's blinding me. I can't see him." Namong Pa unleashed his own chi, flooding his daughter's faltering meridians. He mouthed a desperate, silent plea. "Hold on, just a little longer." Smoke finally thinned, and a nearby warrior's shout tore through the air, relief clashing with fear. "Is the elder safe?" Above, Shuji blew out a long, controlled breath, his mind razor-precise as he weighed every move. "He's rotten to the core, but that's Namong blood. Deadly." And his eyes stayed locked on Peng Seng. He writhed on the ground as Kokofu's words slammed into his skull. Anyone who masters the unrestrained demon art becomes an unrestrained one, and his blood poisons most martial artists, scorching and desiccating any internal energy that isn't his. His cultivation was still low, so the effect would flare and fade fast. But he knew the shock would be devastating. He flung a tiny vial toward Peng Seng. Antidote in hand, he spoke with razor-sharp clarity. "Make your choice. Give it to your niece and watch her light up, or slam it back and claim it all for yourself." Peng Seng lunged, snatched the vial, and slammed the cap on until it sealed tight. It devoured every last thing in one savage gulp. Shuji's eyes shot open. Warriors and Namong Pa froze. A voice tore out, "The elder gulped the antidote. How could he?" Namong Pa's face blackened with fury as he bellowed, "Peng Seng! How dare this bastard!" Peng Seng convulsed in a violent cough, then tore out a gasp of relief. Ha! It worked. If it wasn't poison, he could still claw his way out somehow. Shuji's voice ripped his hope to shreds, cold as river ice. "Fool, you drank River Tribe poison." Peng Seng staggered, vision spinning. "What? I can't see?" he blurted, while Shuji's voice cut through cold and unflinching. "Let your own wicked deeds consume you until you waste away, blind and staggering." Peng Seng howled. "What did you do to me, you monster?" Agony and fury ripped out of him. He lurched and crumpled mere feet away. A spectral figure erupted into being, bearing Shuji's face but grotesquely warped, a cold, mocking grin slicing across it as the spirit sneered. "You got what you deserved, Elder Peng Seng." Peng Seng lurched back, eyes blazing. "What? Who are you, you bastard?" The spirit leaned in, voice like a razor. "You forgot me? You took bribes, buried the concubines you abused until they died, hunted down anyone who stood between you and elderhood? Wasn't all of that me?" Recognition slammed into me. "You're Zhou Yangjia? You're dead!" The spirit's laugh cut the silence, dark and cold. "Dead? I won't abandon you, leave you behind? Wasn't I one of the hands that forged you into an elder?" Peng Seng erupted, his voice hoarse from decades of bottled-up contempt. "Contributor, you don't know your place. Zhou Yangjia, you're nothing but a hunting dog. You, the North Palace of the Namong family. Every subordinate clan and family beneath them, they're all my damn dogs." He lunged at the specter, teeth bared and snarling, then spat. "Now hurry up and piss off to the afterlife." The spirit surged, a grin tearing across its face as it spat. "That's right. You made me do so much of your dirty work." It hunched forward, voice coiling into a venomous whisper. "Thanks to that, I ran into some crazy bastard and wound up as dog soup in an earthen pot." Peng Seng roared back. "You sealed your fate the instant you swore that blood oath. You embraced becoming my dog!" "If you're a dog, embrace your instincts and obey your master's every command." The spirit laughed, dissolving into thin air as it tossed out its final words. "Soon you'll trail my every step for the rest of your life. This place gnaws with bone-deep cold and crushing loneliness. Show up fully prepared." The vision shattered into nothing. Peng Seng spat, defiance blazing in his eyes. Who cares about a vengeful spirit's words? A violent coughing fit ripped through him, blood spraying from his lips. His vision stuttered, then mine snapped back. "Wait, I can see? Was that a hallucination?" A voice thundered up from below. Namong Peng Seng snapped upright like a coiled spring released. "Ha! Yes, hey you!" "Anyone there?" Please, someone save me from this deranged bastard. Is my voice not reaching you? Namong Pa snapped, his voice a razor of ice, betrayal dripping from every syllable. Ping Seng, how could you? You knew that vial was Yule's only hope, and you swallowed it anyway, crushing his chance with a single selfish gulp. Horror crashed across Ping Seng's face. Becoming clan head was inescapable. The crowd below erupted, warriors and allied families roaring in outrage. As Elder Peng sang out, "Did you mean what you just said? That the Namong noble family views its sworn subordinates as mere hunting dogs? We are not your dogs. What did you do using the dead Zhou Yangja? Answer us." Peng Seng's tongue tangled as he scrambled to deny it, but Shuji slid up behind him, voice razor-cold and clinical. "The river tribe's poison blinds your eyes, nose and ears while your mouth still works. You felt that before, haven't you?" A Peng Seng shriek ripped through the world as a chorus spat, "You bastard!" Shuji stormed forward, hoisted his staff, and declared one last truth. The root of all evil lies at the tip of the tongue. Then he lunged, plunging the staff straight into Peng Seng's mouth and finished him. Cold, final. A perfect saying for trash like you. Shuji snatched a pointed blade from the ground, closed on Peng Seng, snarling that Peng Seng's tongue had turned him into a public enemy of the Miram and driven his sworn brother into a life on the run, then sealed it with an emphatic promise. "Hold on. Don't go blaming Peng Seng for plunging a blade into both him and his sworn brother." Peng Seng clapped a hand over his mouth, confusion flashing across his face as he snapped, "What kind of nonsense is that?" and fiercely denied he'd ever done such a thing. Shuji planted himself right before him, leveled his pointed blade and spat, "You did," then sneered that Peng Seng probably wouldn't remember. Without hesitation, Shuji. He drove the blade into Peng Seng again and again. Peng Seng howled in agony, shouting he didn't know who Shuji was or who his sworn brother was. Shuji leveled his staff point-blank at Peng Seng and snapped, "I don't need to know in this life." He exploded forward, thrusting his staff at Peng Seng with crushing force. A blood-curdling scream tore from the altar as the structure began to fracture, and Peng Seng fell to his knees, frantically begging Shuji to stop. Two Namong warriors stormed onto the platform as Peng Seng begged for his life, gasping and clawing for someone to save him. Without turning or breaking his stare, Shuji slammed a warning at the warriors behind him. "One step closer, and I'll kill this guy right now." He brushed off Peng's words as nothing, then reality slammed into him. He was a hostage. The warriors slammed to a halt. Shuji loomed over Peng Seng as Peng Seng choked out a desperate, rasping, "Will you spare me?" Shuji snatched at his collar. He leveled his staff right at him and snapped back, as if. The warriors down below froze in horror as Shuji's blows smashed into Peng Seng. Shuji wrenched Peng Seng's beard and they hurled him off the altar. Peng Seng slammed into the ground below, dust exploding as a warrior's shout ripped the air, screaming for the elder. Nearby families cried, "Heavens!" stunned to see a Namong sect elder toppled like that, and whispering that the three-tiered abyss could really wield such lethal power. Koiko's eyes snapped up to Shuji on the altar as the three-tiered abyss, named again and again, thundered through her mind. Doubt exploded in her chest. Could this really be a coincidence? Shuji whipped his head back to Koiko down below, a savage calm settling in. This had finally sealed his brother's revenge. He flung a silent, aching wish through his mind for her to live the life she yearned for, calling her Koiko as he did. Down below, a warrior pressed his fingers to Peng Seng's throat, hunting for a heartbeat. He snapped his gaze to the clan leader and shook his head. A warrior snapped, "Elder Peng Seng is dead." He hammered that Peng Seng had been an advanced master, and seethed that this had happened in the very heart of the Namong sect. Namong Pa strode before the altar and fixed a fierce stare on Shuji looming above. Shuji roared at the three-tiered abyss, demanding it keep its promise. And as he glared down at them, he realized his blood's poison would last only about an hour. Nemgamul's poisoning was about to loosen its grip. He snatched the antidote bottle Peng Seng had downed on the platform, resolve flaring. He wouldn't meekly confess that to them. He hoisted the bottle high above his head. Namong Pa roared again, snapping, "What are you doing?" pointing out everyone had seen the poison, and demanding to know if Shuji meant to break his promise. Shuji barked that it only counts as medicine if you stick to the dose. It's so tiny you'd have to dip a needle and touch it to the tongue. Then he admitted there's almost none left. Namong Pa clenched his jaw as doubt and belief waged war in his chest. He couldn't trust those words, nor could he cast them aside. Terror coiled in his gut over Yule's fate, and he unleashed a storm of curses at the rotten turn of events. He thrust his hand forward and declared his agreement, demanding Shuji hand over the antidote immediately, and vowing he'd spare his life afterward. Shuji snapped that if Namong Pa didn't snatch it up fast, it would all wash away. He hurled the bottle down onto the platform lay shattered, splinters jutting like teeth. Seeing this, Namgangpa and the warriors behind him froze, terror carving deep lines into their faces. Namgungpa barked, "Find the antidote, save Yul," and his warriors shot forward like arrows, roaring their ascent. One warrior roared an order. "Special unit, grab the antidote now." The rest, charge and seize the three-tiered abyss. Perched above, Shuji crouched and unleashed a flare of demonic chi, sizing up the Namgung clan's full encirclement. Dangerous, yes, but he thought, if I was going to get caught, I wouldn't have started this in the first place. He dropped like a stone and drove his boot into the faces of the warriors racing up the stairs. As he closed in on Namgungpa flared his chi and roared, hurling bastard and three-tiered abyss straight at Shuji. Still suspended in midair, Shuji snarled that Namgungpa had better go search. That was the last of the antidote. Namgungpa groaned as he whipped his head back to his daughter Yul sprawled on the ground, vowing that if anything happened to her, he'd chase Shuji to the ends of hell and execute him with his own hands. Namgungpa surged past Shuji as Shuji sprinted for the altar to grab the antidote. Shuji slammed down, bolted off, and barked, "Suit yourself!" The nearby warriors snapped to attention as Shuji charged in, and one of them roared at the three-tiered abyss to stop, incredulous that he'd dare pull such a stunt in the middle of the Namgung. Did he really think he could escape unscathed? They unleashed a flurry of sword strikes at Shuji. He sprang off his spirit like a living springboard and vaulted clear of their arcs. He launched into midair as the warrior's gaze tracked Shuji soaring skyward. He exploded into a shout, stunned by the jaw-dropping lightness art, and demanding to know if the three-tiered abyss could really be that skilled. Shuji stomped down on the spirit again. It howled, spitting curses at him for using them as stepping stones. Climbing higher, Shuji's pulse thundered as he told himself he was almost there. He saw the Namgung sect's towering outer wall looming ahead. Cross it, and he'd be safe. He slammed down onto the roof's razor tip. A blinding vision tore through his mind. He saw the future. His head was sliced clean off in an instant. His mind screamed that this was insane, and the instant he set foot there, he'd be dead. He sprang backward in an instant. He slammed into the ground and looked up. On the wall stood the man he knew. A curse ripped from him as he remembered that in his past life, he'd thought the man had retired into seclusion, and this was the worst place for him to show himself. He ground his teeth and spat. That's the former Martial Alliance leader, a living legend of the old Miram. The man vaulted onto the roof's razor tip, erupted into a ho-ho-show cackle, peered down at Shuji and said, "You've got a child's instincts, razor sharp." Shuji finished, naming the man Sword King Namgung Cheon. He ground his teeth and hissed that the former leader of the Martial Alliance was a living legend of the old Marim. He felt it in his bones. Just one more step and his head would have been sliced clean off, and he swallowed hard. He admitted it was the Mind Sword. Namgung Cheon shattered the silence and fired a sharp question straight at the kid. He jabbed a finger at the wall and asked, "Aren't you leaving?" Shuji shot back that Namgung Cheon had radiated pure killing intent. He whipped his gaze to Yul and called, "You're not going either?" In a heartbeat, Namgung Cheon vanished from the roof and barked, "I'm going now!" Shuji snapped there was no time to dawdle. He hadn't finished when Namgung Cheon flashed into place right beside Yul. Shuji snapped his head back, spotted him, and ground his teeth. Namgung Cheon cut in as chi coiled around his hand and hissed, "Let's see." He planted his palm on Yul's denjian. As she surged into her body, Yul ripped a ragged, bloody cough from her throat. Namgung Cheon let out a low chuckle and declared she should be fine now. The nearby Namgung warriors erupted, shouting that their lady's color had returned, and barking orders to rush her into the inner chambers. Namgung Cheon sprang to his feet, fixed Shuji with a chuckle and asked, "Is that done now?" Shuji's mind raced. Namgung Cheon could have purged Namgung Yul from the start with his absolute internal energy and nullified every attack. So the fact he waited and only stepped in now screamed of a hidden motive. He snarled that if Namgung Cheon had wanted him dead, it would have ended the moment they met. Namgung Cheon wasn't trying to kill him. He wanted something else. Namgung Cheon feigned a mild surprise, fingers dancing through his beard. He flashed a predatory grin and sneered that Shuji was a smart kid. Shuji ground his teeth and fired a razor-sharp, "Thanks, old man." The nearby warriors surged in, encircling Shuji as Namgung Pa bellowed, "Bring that villain in alive! Bind him tight and haul him before him." Before the warriors could take a step, Namgung Cheon bellowed, "Halt!" and froze them dead in their tracks. Namgung Pa erupted, roaring at his father and demanding why he was doing this to a man who was a criminal. Namgung Cheon cut him off, voice cold as steel. "We all lost that kid, and I was the one who caught him." A wicked grin curled on his lips as he hissed, Don't spoil the fun. This is the most fun I've had in nearly 30 years. He spun to his son and asked, "Will you show me some filial piety?" Namgung Pa and his warriors fell back, and Namgung Cheon wheeled to Shuji, voice cold as steel as he declared his word the law of the Namgung sect. He bragged that even the emperor hung on his every word, valuing his judgment above all others. He stewed over enacting a new law, and after a few heartbeats, he snarled, voice like ice. It was done without his permission. Those words slammed shut any chance of leaving the Namgung estate. Shuji's mind raced over the decree as he crunched the numbers. Dig inward and vanish into the slums would only give him a 30% shot at escape. A desperate gamble. But if push came to shove, he'd take it. He demanded to know how he could get permission to leave. Namgung Cheon thrust his hand forward and dared Shuji with a 5-move handicap, vowing to keep his sword sheathed and only dodge so Shuji could go all out. Gasps ripped through the nearby crowd, faces frozen in stunned disbelief. They stared, stunned. The Sword King actually called it a handicap, and capped it at just 5 moves. Did he really value the 3-tiered abyss that much? Shuji's eyes narrowed. He knew 5 moves was Namgung Cheon ordering him to unleash every last ounce of power to satisfy him. He snapped into his stance and declared, "I have no reason to refuse." He exhaled, coaxing his chi and spirits free in a slow, simmering drift. He leveled his staff at Namgung Cheon, intent razor-sharp. A fierce thrill shot through Namgung Cheon as he crowed. "Just as I thought. My eyes didn't fail me." He swallowed hard and, in a silent plea, begged him to put on a show as Shuji surged forward with his first attack. A spiraling chi roared at the tip of his staff. Nearby warriors recoiled, breath caught, murmuring it was dragging them into its maw. The attack thundered toward Namgung Cheon, ready to slam into him. He honed his gaze into a blade and he sheared Shuji's attack clean in two with his bare hand. The altar behind them detonated in a deafening boom as the attack's shattered remnants slammed into it. Nearby people jumped back, shouting that it was collapsing and to dodge, and Namgung Cheon chuckled. Shuji dove low to dodge Namgung Cheon's counterattack as it cleaved a chunk from the wall right behind him. His gaze snapped razor-sharp and pinned Namgung Cheon, his right hand trembling. He froze, his gaze snapping to something that had just caught his attention. Namgung Cheon leaned forward, voice urgent and fierce. "What's wrong?" Shuji barked, reminding them Namgung Cheon had sworn he wouldn't draw his sword. Namgung Cheon's eyes snapped wide as he fixed his gaze on his sword and demanded aloud, "Why is it drawn?" He convinced himself the sword fit better than his hands and moved of its own will. He insisted Shuji would understand when he reached his age, that dementia these days just flickered in and out. Shuji's thoughts snapped. Was a senile old man any better than a man who shattered his promise? Namgung Cheon cleared his throat and let his voice slice through the silence. They shrugged it off as Shuji testing the waters. He asked if he should take back one move to make up for it. Shuji clenched his staff and snapped, "There's no need." Namgung Cheon split into a wide grin, let out a low chuckle, then shot back, "Ho ho ho ho, I knew you would say that." He announced he couldn't wait for the final 4 moves, excitement crackling in his voice. Shuji locked his gaze on Namgung Cheon and thought to himself that this was Sword King Namgung Cheon, a mountain of steel that crushed petty tricks, hammers, owls, caltrops, like brittle toys. He forged a knot of dense chi at the staff's tip, vowing to funnel every ounce of power into one devastating strike. He drove his heels into the earth and vowed inwardly to blast past the 10th level of the compression stage and seize the power of the unrestrained one. He rocketed straight at Namgung Cheon. Watching Shuji's movement, Namgung Cheon smirked and a soft ho-ho slipped from his lips. He snapped that if he'd known something like this would come hurtling at him. The instant he promised to go easy on him, regret hit him like a sucker punch. He slipped the strike and spun on his heel. His right hand shot out, snatching Shuji's staff and shoving it aside. A brutal strike slammed into the younger man, launching him stumbling backward. Namgung Cheon snapped his arm back into place with a sharp click and released a low, amused laugh. They say even a brush of sleeves can be fate. Yet here we are, saddled with a merciless fate. Shuji scoffed, flatly refusing. He wouldn't accept that fate. Namgung Cheon snarled that even if Shuji refused, their fate still bound them, and he slammed up 3 fingers, 3 moves left. Shuji dropped into his stance and he lunged, ramming his staff forward with brutal force. Namgung Cheon swallowed a contemptuous click that never left his lips. The first strike pierced like a harpoon. The next crashed down like a colossal battering ram. He slammed his left palm into the incoming blow as Shuji surged forward. After the tense clash, blood gushed from his own arm. Shuji withdrew. Namgung Cheon spun his left hand in a slow circle and snapped, "That stings. My joints will ache every rainy day from now on." While Shuji fell silent, eyes locked on his right arm as blood dripped from it. Namgung Qian's eyes narrowed. Shuji had to have been a soldier. Those spear techniques were forged on battlefields against barbarians. He realized it wasn't an officer's refined style, but the military spearman's art. The foot soldier's raw, ruthlessly practical technique honed to a razor edge. He sneered that such mastery was impossible for someone Shuji's age. Shuji let out a sharp inward click of his tongue. A cold jolt hit him. The old man peeled back every mask, saw straight through him, and it terrified him. Namgung Cheon flashed 2 fingers, declared 2 moves remained, and threatened he could still snatch back his initial offer. Shuji whipped his staff through the air and shot back. No need. Wind snarled to life, spiraling up to coil around them. Namgung Chien grinned, murmured, voice electric. It's only getting more interesting as we go. Crimson cheese coiled around Shuji's staff as he spun it relentlessly. He rooted his feet like iron anchors, refusing to budge. The rotation slammed to a halt, and he whipped the staff at Namgung Cheon with bone-shattering force. Namgung Cheon smirked, snapping his forearms into an X to block the blow, but staggered for a heartbeat on impact. Shuji groaned as blood gushed again from his arms, sharpening his ferocity and fueling a savage, relentless assault. When the dust from the clash finally cleared, he skidded backward. Namgung Chan clutched his right arm and roared, a sweep so fierce it could topple 1,000 armies. My bones are rattling. Shuji's thoughts churned. He inched forward, no more than half a step. Namgung warriors erupted into stunned murmurs. The Sword King, one of the Supremes closest to being #1 under heaven, had been driven back even half a step. Who is that young man? Namgung Cheon shot his right arm skyward and thundered. Now all that remains is... He jabbed a single finger into the air and bellowed, 1 move left! Inside, he dared Shuji to unleash every last trick he had. Shuji coiled like a spring, every nerve screaming as he readied his final strike. A spirit crackled into existence at the tip of his staff. He stared and felt a cold certainty settle into his bones. Namgung Peng Sang had finally been tamed. With that, he blasted into the unrestrained one's second stage. Namgung Qian's eyes shot wide as Shuji's power slammed into him, and he thought, what? His inner energy just deepened again, so this wasn't all he had? Shuji dropped into a crouch, every muscle coiling like a spring. Then he rocketed into the air. The spirit at the staff's tip crystallized into a blade. Namgung Qian stared in disbelief. Wait, a spear? A lone Shuji hurtled down to strike. Namgung Qian bellowed a booming, ho ho ho, then snapped, this won't do. He ripped his sword from its sheath, steel flashing in a single lightning-fast motion. A colossal wave of chi slammed into him, swallowing him whole and humming through his bones. He barreled headlong into the attack. A cataclysmic collision of energy detonated, ripping outward in a savage blast. The scene slammed the onlookers backward, and one of them cried out, it's a massive storm! Everyone, watch out! As their collision exploded around them, Shuji felt Namgung Cheon's internal energy surge, vast and regal like a true Sword King, and swore he'd hurl that very power back at him. He vaulted onto Namgung Cheon's blade, planting both feet. He shoved off and rocketed away. He launched himself over the wall and tore off. Seconds later, Namgung Pa materialized at Namgung Cheon's side. They asked if they should go after Shuji. Namgung Cheon snapped to leave him. That final move was engineered to let the boy bolt from the start, and even if they dragged him back, Namgung Cheon admitted he wouldn't have the nerve to meet his eyes. The first meeting was a mistake. The last was deliberate. Namgung Pa barked, why did father draw his sword at the end, when the first time looked like a reflex? The second draw was cold and deliberate, cutting off Namgung Cheon before he could even start to answer. The blade snapped in 2. Its upper half tore free and crashed to the earth. He stared it down and said flatly, I might die if I try to live. Was any choice ever mine to make? Namgung Pa stared at his father's shattered sword, concern carved into his face, and whispered, Father. Namgung Cheon replied that if Shuji had fought with a true spear instead of a staff, he likely wouldn't be alive. He smirked, saying the ink bamboo staff Shuji carried was probably pried from the staff demon after Shuji killed it. Anyone struck by a spear like that wouldn't live to scream. He let his shattered sword clatter to the ground and bellowed that drawing his blade for the final strike wasn't a mistake. Life's worth more than saving face. He chuckled, admitting he'd broken his promise 2 or 3 times and kept getting knocked flat by a young man. He pivoted to his son, expression stone cold, and confessed, voice cracking, that this old man was too ashamed to face the fellow heroes of Anhui. He had no face left. Namgung burst into view and bellowed that, for the Namgung clan, he swore right then and there he'd settle everything and make the main house pay for today's incident in full. He dropped to his knees before the gathered heroes, voice raw as he begged forgiveness and declared. The banquet wrapped up. A while later, workers scoured the Namgung estate's banquet grounds, hauling away smashed goblets and sweeping up confetti. Namgung Pa planted himself beside his father on the balcony of the towering building and lashed out with his words. He snapped, stunned. Who was this three-tiered abyssin expert? A man whose sect, affiliation, age, and even face were now known. Namgung Cheon lounged in his chair, rolling his wrist, and sneered that the man fought like a lowly thug. His spear arts were third-rate, yet his martial arts reigned at the summit. His footwork left even the peak in the dust, and his tactical calculation lived inside the transformation realm. He declared Shuji an impenetrable riddle no one could crack. Namgung Pa slammed a hand over his face, roaring that letting that person go alive had crushed the Namgung clan's honor. Namgung Cheon shot back with a cold smirk, saying straight up that it had actually worked in his son's favor. Namgung Pa snapped. How? My father said Peng Sang, the thorn in our side, was dead. His head smashed in. He'd been a council elder who relentlessly opposed the family head, but, as an old retainer personally favored by Namgung Cheon, he'd been untouchable, and now he's gone. The path is wide open. Namgung Pa snapped. Father, how could you say something like that? Namgung Cheon snapped that he must always turn every situation to his advantage. Then his tone went deadly serious, as he ordered his son to thoroughly uncover Peng Sang's evil deeds and provide full relief for everyone harmed. He goaded Namgung Pa into seizing the moment and pinning every past mistake of the main house on Peng Sang. He forged the Namgung name into iron, burying the honor they'd lost that day, and the beast seized as the blood oath sacrifice, he declared, was Peng Sang. He snapped back to it, leaned in and blurted, Ah, right, are you okay? Namgung Pa nodded. She was fine. And since his father had purged the poison, she should have regained consciousness by now. Namgung Cheon smirked and barked at him to relay a message to Yul. She must capture that man called Three-Tiered Abyss, whatever his name was, alive. Namgung Pa exploded in disbelief, roaring, Why would Yul do something like that? Namgung Cheon screamed, fury blazing, saying that before marriage a stranger had wrapped her naked in his arms and their lips had met, a scandal that wrecked her prospects and forced her to fetch the groom herself. While Namgung Pa snapped that times had changed and reminded his father the man had repeatedly promised he'd find a groom himself, Namgung Cheon sneered in disgust. Do you mean a son-in-law from the Orthodox faction? And warned his son not to chain his alliances and studies to the Orthodox alone. Only by learning beyond them could he survive Marim's ever-shifting violent waves. Namgung Pa bellowed that the Namgung clan was a colossal oak, rooted so deep no mere ripple could topple them. Marim's storms would break against them and roll away. Namgung Cheon's eyes slit shut as he hissed, Do you truly believe that? Namgung Pa froze into silence. His father released a deep, world-weary sigh and compared Marim to the vast, merciless sea. When it lay peaceful, folks cast lines and cracked open cold ones. Once a storm arose, it exploded into a savage, roaring maelstrom. A torrent of chi erupted from him as he roared, Xinjiang is moving! Namgung's eyes snapped wide in alarm. Xinjiang. He swallowed a sharp breath, recognition slamming into him. The demonic cult's main stronghold, a shadowed, impenetrable fortress of dread. Namgung Cheon locked her gaze on the distant horizon and said, Get ready. A colossal wave is barreling in, and everything's about to change. Cut to the Hojung sect. Shuji strode into Koiko's room and she planted the plaque on her table. He barked Brother Ho at her, declaring her revenge finally complete. He threw out that it was all for the Hojung sect. He felt his thoughts yanked into a vivid memory from his past life. He froze as he saw himself lying on the ground, growling that the floor was nothing but mud and far too harsh to sleep on. Brother Ho walloped him with a bundle of hay and barked, Knew you'd complain, Shuji, so I brought bedding. Here. Shuji groaned and spun toward him, exasperation hissing from his chest, while Brother Ho grunted that any place to lay your body was enough and urged him to spread the hay and sleep. Tomorrow would bring another battle. Shuji dropped the hay and stopped short as fleas exploded into motion, leaping and skittering across it, and hurled it back at Brother Ho, yelling, Hey, it's crawling with fleas. Did you pick this up? Brother Ho roared with laughter and shrugged. As long as it's warm, it's fine. Watching the memory, present-day Shuji's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. A heartbeat later, he struck a match, ignited the incense stick, and murmured, Seize this life untouched by hardship and revel in its abundance. He vaulted through the window. He burst into the stables and snatched up his belongings. As he crossed the threshold, a voice thundered from behind. Stop right there! He spun and found several men surrounding him. The voice continued, sneering, How ridiculous! Did you think you could escape safely? Shuji ground his teeth as he locked onto the familiar figure behind him and muttered under his breath. Damn it. This just turned into a real problem. One of the men sneered that Shuji wouldn't dare leave without saying a single word. Another scoffed, he's a walking curse, an unlucky bastard through and through. From the stable boys, Wu Tuyen stepped forward, sorrow carved into his face, and told Shuji to go on. He wouldn't see him off. Shuji plunged his hand into the bush, snatched up his belongings, and shot back. Right. Tears cutting tracks down Wu Tuyen's cheeks, he choked out, Where are you going? Shuji snapped a hat onto his head, hoisted his staff over his shoulder and answered. Wu Tuyen's voice died as tears kept pouring down her face. As Shuji spun away, Wu Tuyen screamed after him, Fine, go then, you heartless bastard! And the other stable boys, tears streaking down their faces, choked out farewells and begged him to take care, telling him if he ever had nowhere to go, Hojong Sect's doors were always open. Wu Tuyen roared, Where else could a guy like you possibly go? I'll be waiting. You're coming back. Definitely. A ghost of a smile flickered across Shuji's lips. Then he sprang and sailed over the top of the wall. He hadn't even gotten far when Wu Tuyen's shout ripped through the air. Hey, you punk! Which way is west? Shuji spun around and fired back. Hanum! Later, the sky choked the light and hardened into a cold, leaden gray. Thunder cracked overhead, booming like a war drum. Shuji's gaze snapped upward as lightning tore across the sky. A voice cut through the air behind him. Hey, Shuji! He snapped his head back and spotted Koiko doubled over, chest heaving. She screamed his name over and over, each cry tearing through the air. She froze, hoisting Hojung's sect plaque, and whispered, Shuji, so you were the three-tiered abyss. She revealed Bong trailed everyone obediently, yet only two people ever struck true fear into him. Him, and the person who'd pressed money into her hand for the golden wound salve in that lashing rain. She flashed a grin and shot back that he also reeked of horse manure. Shuji bent his head and sniffed himself. She snapped, I'm kidding! Silence slammed between them as rain ripped open the sky. After a beat, Koiko cut in, thanking him for igniting the mugwort fire, for taking the reins of the carriage, for listening to her worries. She gripped his sleeve, eyes burning, and thanked him for everything he'd done for the Zhou family, against the Black Path sect, through the staff demon incident, and even during the recent chaos at the Namong sect. She scrubbed rain and tears from her cheeks and snarled that she finally understood he'd been behind it all. She shot him a grateful smile, confessed she'd been dying to know why he kept helping, then threw down a sly challenge. If he'd meant to tell her, he wouldn't have hidden it. Shuji spun on his heel and strode away. Koiko latched onto his clothes, finished in a flood of tears. Don't you dare walk away, we're family! He surged forward, never once glancing over his shoulder. Silence snapped over him. Then he eased forward with a whisper-soft push. He clung with every ounce of will, pulse hammering until she let go. Thunder ripped the sky open as she fired. Are you leaving? He replied with only silence. So you're going, she whispered. Every syllable a quiet goodbye. Silence shattered as Shuji finally spoke, his voice slicing through. Stay well. He didn't even get to take another step before Koiko barreled straight at him. She slipped behind him and locked her arms around him in a fierce back hug. She lunged in and pressed a fierce kiss to his lips. When they parted, she breathed, Let's meet again. Out in a different corner of the bamboo forest, a group barreled through the undergrowth, before screeching to a stop. They were the Namong sect's Purple Moon Search Unit, the sect's special operations team, and Namong Yule stood before them. She slammed her eyes shut as her grandfather's words thundered back through her memory. Hunt down the three-tiered abyss and haul him here, alive! A blazing surge shot through her as she admitted she couldn't fathom why her grandfather had given that order. Yet it wound up tipping the scales in her favor. Heat flared across her cheeks. She straightened her clothes, and vowed under her breath she'd catch him. They bound him before her and lashed him mercilessly, just like the first time, until his whole body lay drenched in blood. One of the men behind her shouted, they'd found a trace, tearing her out of her thoughts. She jolted, pressed a hand to her lips as her cheeks flamed crimson. Her hand shook as she crushed it into a fist and hissed to herself, No distractions. I'll catch him first. Even if it costs me everything. She roared the command, Chase him! She clenched her jaw and vowed to herself, I'll do it, no matter what it takes. She dragged her tongue across her lips, then sealed it with a quiet, deadly intensity. I will make him kneel before me. Time barreled forward. Shuji planted his foot on the cliff's edge. Perched on the cliff, she stared down as the river snaked below, glinting like a silver blade. He stared down at the bobbing stalls below, let a slow, heavy breath escape, and murmured, It's been a long time. This was the water market. He strode into the bustling market as boat merchants hollered to sell their wares. One cried he'd hauled a 6-foot catfish, surely a high-ranking official from the Dragon Palace. while another bellowed that his red snapper haul was overflowing and urged buyers to grab them fast. A third vendor shouted, hawking a steaming bowl of rice soup for only 3 coins. Shuji's head snapped up. He vaulted onto the boat, crashed into a chair and ordered a steaming bowl of rice soup, slamming an animal pelt onto the table as payment. The owner narrowed his eyes and snapped, "Is that marten fur? I only accept money." He loomed over Shuji, stared him down with a stone-cold glare and snapped, "No money, no food." Right then, a young girl stormed up, slammed 2 coins onto the table and shouted, "Here's the money for the soup." She whipped around to the owner and snapped, "Is that enough?" The owner grunted, snapping he'd only cough up the worth of 2 coins, just so she knew. She stuck out her tongue, hooked a finger under one eye, yanked the skin down and shot him a mocking, "Bleh!" When the food arrived, Shuji lunged forward and tore into it, devouring every bite. She sat across from him and asked bluntly if he was a beggar. Shuji snapped that he wasn't, and she swung her feet idly, repeating her mother's law. Anyone without money is a beggar. Irritated, Shuji cut the topic off and shot, "What's your name?" Bayok Ryan snapped, "Beggar mister, where are you going?" Shuji shot back, "Hanam." She blinked. "Where's that?" He said coldly, "Where the Murim alliance is." She prodded, "Why?" He growled, "Because there are too many bastards I have to kill." Bayok Ryan snapped upright, surprise ripping through him, and Shuji jabbed the question at her. "So he's a martial artist too? Did you know about this?" She gave a sharp nod, voice low. Her mother had told her the path of supremacy society that sent her mother here were the Murim, and the Murim were terrifyingly strong. Shuji planted his spoon on the table. They snatched up the marten fur and snapped, "I see. Thanks for the meal. This is for the soup." Bayok Ryan scoffed and waved him off. "It's fine," she sneered, declaring the marten fur worth far more than the soup and hissing, "You stupid beggar, mister," as Shuji stuffed his things and stubbornly insisted he'd pay for the meal anyway. Then her voice snapped, suddenly sharp and impossible to ignore. She twisted her fingers and begged him, eyes frantic. If he met the Murim uncles later, would he ask them for permission to go ashore? Her mother lay sick and they needed it, and her mother had warned Murim only spoke to their own. Shuji considered this and said that if he met them, before he could finish, the owner materialized behind him and hissed, "Me! Bayok!" Ryan spun, frowning hard. "Huh? I already paid for the soup. Why are you doing this?" Her words died as she froze, staring at the owner's blood-soaked face with an arrow jutting from his skull, and with his last breath he whispered, "Save me." A ship thundered in behind them as bandits cut down merchants, and one of them bellowed to seize every scrap, valuables or trash, and laughed, cruel and triumphant. He barked a deal, spare their lives if they dropped their weapons and surrendered without a sound. Shuji drank in the chaos and spat under his breath. First the mountain bandits, now the water bandits. This never ends. As Bayok Ryan froze, shock pinning him to the spot, Shuji snatched up his staff, locked eyes with her and said Bayok Ryan to pin down her name, then thundered he'd grant her request right then. Baffled, she demanded, "What are you going to do?" As he strode forward, the wrappings on his staff unspooled and tumbled away. He shot a look back at her and said, "What else? I'll have a conversation." At the ship's prow, bandits hurled an elderly man onto the deck, and he roared to speak with whoever was in charge. A man seated nearby leaned in, announced he was Gongsun Hop, a Baekdu of the Jianggang River stronghold, and snapped, "What do you want to say, elder?" The elders choked out that, unlike the fishermen, he ran the red light district and warned the path of supremacy society backed them. If they did this, the society wouldn't stay silent. Before he could finish, Gongsun Hop cleaved a head clean in two with one savage sword stroke. Ice laced his voice as he barked, "They will stay still." He roared to the crowd that the path of supremacy society had sold them straight into his hands. Merchants muttered in stunned disbelief. "Sold?" they cried. They'd nearly wiped out their debt. They'd been promised freedom if they worked through to year's end. One of them dropped to his knees, begging that he had to reach the mainland. Gongsun Hop whipped his hand through the air and barked for his men to silence them. The bandits mercilessly cut them down one by one, screams of agony ripping and echoing across the water. Gongsun Hop eyed them with a smirk and scoffed. These ignorant martial arts clueless fools bled shockingly red. His gaze snapped narrow as a lone figure strode into view, closing the distance toward him. A lone figure strode across the wooden platform, each footfall steady as a heartbeat. A staff jammed in his right fist, a hammer clenched in his left, Bayok Ryan trailing in his wake. Two bandits surged forward to cut him off. One curled his lip and sneered that if he'd come to buy it was already too late. The other spat that by stepping into the water market he and the brat behind him belonged to them, and Bayuk Ryan clamped her hands over her head, ducked down, and whimpered in fear. With a single, effortless sweep, Shuji lashed out with his staff and he obliterated both bandits before they could even blink. Their bodies crashed into the water and he sneered. Not bad for a mere water bandit. He pinned Gongsun Hop with a glare and snarled, "Your blood is red." Gongsun Hop roared the command. "Attack all at once, archers fire first." Arrows tore through the air as one of them howled they'd turn him into a hedgehog. Shuji ripped the sash from his waist and hurled it forward, the flying fabric slamming into the volley and stopping it cold. He whirled, lashing the sash into a snapping arc, drove iron caltrops into the archers' faces. Their screams shredded the air as he blinked out and rematerialized at their side. Gongsun Hop had already cut down the final archers. Gongsun Hop thundered, "Who are you and where did you come from?" Shuji said nothing, clamping his jaw as he dragged a rag across his blood-slick staff. Gongsun Hop shrugged, unfazed, and tossed out a peace offer. They should part ways peacefully. If they clashed, one would surely die. Why drag them into a slow, bloody war of attrition? Shuji spat that Gongsun Hop would be the one to die, and dared them to bet on whether his body would stay intact. Rage erupted in Gongsun Hop. He snarled. Shuji, a wide-eyed pup, didn't yet know the tiger's bone-rattling ferocity. Rage surged as he slammed his blade downward, vowing to make him regret his arrogance. Before the blade could land, Shuji slammed his staff into it, sparks flying from the clash. The blow catapulted the sword into the air. Gongsun Hop gaped at his broken left hand, disbelief cracking through him as he muttered, "Ugh, huh?" Shuji's voice crystallized into ice as he spat. "Regret? Me? As a water bandit you'd expect nothing less. Drown if you must, only your mouth will bob above the waves." Cold sweat streamed down Gongsun Hop's face as he stared at his shattered wrist. His bones splintered from a single block. Only a first-rate master could do that, and the man before him proved it. He stared down Shuji and, in the silence of his mind, crowned himself a peak master. Every instinct screamed to sprint away without a backward glance, but where could he possibly run? Nearby, a woman shouted Bayuk Ryan's name. He exploded forward, bolting to her with tears streaming as he cried, "Mom!" Panic clawed at Gongsun Ha as he snatched a bottle from his pocket. Shuji wouldn't spare him even if he begged, so this could be his last desperate gamble. He flung the bottle onto the wooden floor. It shattered and detonated in a blinding burst of light. Then it rocketed skyward, bursting into the air like a blazing firework. He forced an awkward grin and barked, "The captain and all my nearby subordinates are coming this way. Run away now." Shuji's voice was ice cold as he said, "Don't worry, I'll kill you faster." Gongsun Hap snapped his feet up and let out a guttural "Coo indeed." Then without warning, he drove his heel down, shredding the wooden platform into splinters, then sneered, "You really think that's going to be easy?" Shuji knocked the whistling wooden shards aside and shot back, "If this is what you wanted to show me, too easy." His gaze cut into razor slits. Gongsun Hop exploded into hysterical laughter. "Ha, ha, ha, ha!" Then sneered, "You fool!" He snatched Bayuk Ryan, roared that he'd seen Shuji with the girl just moments ago, warned one more step would kill her, and ordered Shuji to drop his weapon and kneel. Shuji froze mid-step. He locked eyes with the sobbing Bayuk Ryan and whispered, "Bayuk Ryan, I'm sorry. I won't forsake the water bandits just to rescue you." She smiled through her tears and choked out, "Yes, I understand. Please, just let my mom go to the mainland." Shuji snapped a nod and swore he'd see it through. He surged forward. Gongsun Hap lurched back, disbelief cracking his voice as he screamed, "What? What are you doing? I'll really kill her?" Shuji's voice froze the room as he hissed, "Kill her? Pay the price and I'll drag you through the worst agony on earth. I'll start at your fingertips and toes and flay your skin in razor-thin strips until only your torso remains. I'll gouge out your eyes, wrench every tooth from your mouth, slice off your ears and nose, sear your tongue with flame, then hurl you into a pigsty so you can neither live nor die for the rest of your life." Dread carved itself across Gongsun Hap's face. He choked out that if Shuji dared that move, the captain, no, the stronghold leader, wouldn't sit idly by. The whole path of supremacy society would rise up against him. In a heartbeat, a spirit tore through the air and materialized right behind Shuji. The instant his eyes met it, Gongsun Hop's body convulsed, and a raw, terrified groan ripped from his throat. Block Rio realized his hold was slipping after only a few moments. Gongsun Hop threw down his grip and let her go, voice cracking as he asked if, by saving her and surrendering, Shuji would spare him. Before he could finish, his eyes snapped wide in horror. Shuji's staff lashed toward his face as he spat, "I told you. I'll send you straight to the pigsty." Later, merchants clustered by the bamboo forest, swapping the tale. One scratched his face and swore he was a merchant from the water market, saying that when bandits from the Jianggang River strongholds moved to slaughter innocents and steal their wealth, A nameless wanderer tore through the fray and saved them. Another swore the man's mastery of the black spear was godlike and impossible to pin down. The first shot back that it wasn't a spear at all but a long, snapping whip, and it was an old man who saved them. A third barged in, insisting it was a boy, even as he admitted he'd barely seen it. Another swore the hero towered 9 feet tall with a thunderous sword, a juju-bred face and a beard longer than his body. They argued whether he bolted upstream or downstream after killing all the bandits, and Namong Yul, standing with the Purple Moon Search Unit, watched them and sighed deeply. She bristled as survivors' testimonies collided into chaos. What kind of person was the 3-tiered abyss, judging by his strikes at the Zhou family manor and the Namong clan? He wasn't an orthodox martial artist. He hunted criminals with ruthless precision and hauled ordinary people out of the jaws of suffering. This time he'd ripped the water market merchants from the jaws of disaster. Was he a hero or a villain? Her hand flew to her neck as the memory of meeting Shuji slammed back into her. His cold threat, rip off her ears and slit her throat if she interrupted, haunted her. As the memory faded, she closed her eyes and said aloud, "No, he is definitely a villain. He must be." A voice tore through the room. "He's not a villain!" Namong Yul's gaze dropped as he peered down to see Yoke Ryan planted herself beside her mother amid the bustling merchants, and shot back that the ragged beggar brother was kind. He wasn't a villain. A Namong warrior leaned in and hissed into Yul's ear that something was closing in from above. Baffled, Yul muttered, "Ha ha," and the warrior hissed the warning again. She snapped her head up as the uniform slammed into her memory. She knew it at once. The man above locked eyes on them and barked for his men to halt. They'd rest there for only a heartbeat. As the group hurtled downward, "You'll spot them," and she and her warriors dropped into a deep, synchronized bow before the elder of the MANHUA sect. B. Muguk, Taoist master of MANHUA and a fearsome instructor at Ascension Academy, stepped forward, nodded once, and barked, "What brings her here?" Yul dropped her gaze and admitted she'd come home to her main family for the break. But a personal issue had flared up. She was determined to settle it before she went back to the academy. Bimugayuk gave a hard nod and declared they were hunting a public enemy of Murim. That villain raped and murdered his junior sister, then coldly defected to the demonic cult. Intelligence planted him squarely in this very spot. Yul's eyes snapped wide, dread lacing her words as she blurted, "You mean the Death Blossom?" Bimugayuk confirmed it, confessed the details were confidential and that their ranks were perilously thin, then implored the Namong clan to lend their support. Yul snapped. The mission was her grandfather's direct order, so she had to secure the main family's permission. Bimugayuk slammed a hand up and relented. Orders from the senior Sword King couldn't be defied. He spun to his men and barked, "Move!" The villain was closing in, and innocent blood could spill any second. His disciples echoed the command without hesitation, and bolted off at once. After they left, a Namong warrior slammed a warning at Yul. Their trail plunges downstream too. The target's path cuts through the water market and ties straight into that area. Yul sank into thought as a chilling pattern snapped into place. The 3-tiered abyss mirrored the Death Blossom's movements, and she forced herself to admit the killer who slaughtered Baek Du at the Jangang River stronghold might be the very criminal the Murim Alliance hunted. She snapped orders to her unit. "Shadow the Murim Alliance's route for now. If you spot the Death Blossom first, don't engage it. Radio its position." She snapped, voice like steel. "Our target, until the bitter end, is the 3-tiered abyss." Elsewhere, Shuji sat before a solitary grave, the air thick with old regrets as memories hit him like thunder. A rustle leapt out from behind. A man materialized, sword in hand. He halted, voice tight with apology, and said he hadn't expected a guest. Eyes snapped to Shuji. He demanded to know whose grave he'd been bowing at. Shuji shrugged, voice like ice. "I don't know," the man scoffed. "Why pay respects to a stranger's grave?" Shuji snapped back. "It rips me apart to see someone left lying alone in a place nobody ever visits." That was it. The man cracked a sly smirk and he slammed his sword into the ground, dropped to a knee beside Shuji and said, "Then let me join you." He sank into a bone-deep bow before the grave, then snapped his head up and declared, "A heart that kneels to pay last rites at a stranger's grave is pure righteousness. That gallant, chivalrous spirit deserves every reward. Claim this blade. It's a treasure that'll score you an easy 100 gold." Shuji curled a cruel smirk and shot back. "If I were the kind of man to take a sword for 100 gold, I'd have slit your throat and pocketed that 1,000 gold bounty long before now." He shot to his feet, staff locked in his grip. He locked eyes with the man, bellowed, "Draw your sword, and unleash the Death Blossom. Oja Un."